The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song, he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won.
Okay, so, I mean, you can tell already by what we're repping here. We're repping the silver and black, baby. And you can also assume by the length of this video that this is the most work that I've ever put into anything that I've done on this YouTube channel. And you'd be right, but I'm proud of it because I am proud to be a fan of this team despite not seeing a single playoff win in my entire existence, which for some of you, that might be hard to understand. Why does he feel so passionate about this team that has done nothing but beat him down? But throughout the making of this video, I cried. I remembered why I resonate so much with this team, and I felt pain, joy, and everything in between. And by the end of this video, I hope I can at least help you to understand why this goofy team with a pirate logo has done the same thing to so many people, and maybe even yourself. And I also hope I can help you understand why this franchise is more than just a football team as well. How they transcended culture, what they represent, what their greatest figures stand for, the legends that made this organization what it is. And of course, you'll get to hear me lose my fucking mind a few times, which we'll get to. But without further ado, I don't really think Tom's not doing too well right now, so and this is not his video. We do not enjoy Tom's presence in the Raiders organization, or at least in moments. But anyways, let's get right into the video, and let's begin with discussing the man who represents everything it means to be a Raider, and one of the most polarizing figures in sports itself, Al Davis. Now, Al Davis is a one-of-one man, and the story of the Raiders franchise, in essence, is really the story of Al Davis's life. But contrary to what a lot of people think, the Raiders were not actually founded by Al Davis. Instead, in 1960, the Raiders were a last-second addition to the AFL when a group of investors came together and made it happen. And from the very beginning, the seeds of what made the Raiders were put into place. While the wealthier 49ers across the bay thrived with coach Red Hickey, the Raiders were underdogs from day one and pretty much immediately suffered from massive money issues and almost disappeared from the league. So yeah, before Al Davis, the Raiders were kind of a joke. And you know, believe it or not, they actually weren't for a long time when he came. But in the moment, the team was almost not even named the Raiders, and in a contest, apparently, the Senors were chosen as the name. But there was a conspiracy that one of the owners, Chet Soda, rigged the vote because he called people Senor himself, and he had a vision to have all the cheerleaders wear sombreros, which maybe there was something there. That's all I'm saying. Anyways, after that whole artist vision thing was sabotaged, the Raiders' name was chosen instead. But holy hell, the first years of this team were incredible in every way that doesn't have to do with the word incredible. In 1960, the Raiders managed to actually win 6 games, which isn't terrible for a startup team, and the team's first ever quarterback, Tom Flores, led the league in completion percentage, but the roster, I'm dead serious, would have lost to a fair amount of college teams that season. The player who gained the most yardage for them on the season was Tony Teresa, who would never play in the NFL again after this year, so that's nice. And yeah, this roster had literally nobody except for quite possibly the greatest Raider ever. Jim Otto was the original Raider. He was on the team when it was formed, and he played his entire 15-year career with the Raiders, making 12 Pro Bowls and 10 All-Pro teams. There was no better player to eventually build a culture around than Jim. This was the guy that claimed he broke his nose almost every single game, and eventually Otto would become the cornerstone of an impenetrable offensive line that defined an era. But yes, the point still is, without strong leadership, the Raiders looked like they would be a niche trivia answer to look back at in 60 years, and people would be like, oh, did you know there was once a football team called the Raiders? Because in 61, they started out the year, you know, pretty well. They got outscored 0-99 in their first 2 games, and 1962 was even worse. In the first 2 rounds of the draft, the Raiders, with the first overall pick, took future MVP quarterback Roman Gabriel, who decided to sign with the NFL's Rams instead. And then, with their second pick, they drafted another Hall of Famer, this time in wide receiver Lance Allworth, and then proceeded to trade him. They gave him away for literally nothing. One guy was like, okay, but still, I mean, come on now. And yeah, this draft also, by the way, had 34 rounds because it was funny, and shockingly, 34th round pick Bill Worrell didn't exactly work out. But more specifically, the 1961 Raiders were a tragedy. This was one of the worst years in sports history for any team. They had a point differential of -221, which is significantly worse than the winless Browns a few years ago. I mean, sweet mercy. And you could argue 62 still was somehow worse. The team only won a single game, went through its 3rd coach in 2 years, were bankrupt, were playing on a high school field, and their most notable achievement was basically inventing fantasy football. So, I mean, just good work, y'all. I appreciate it. So, okay, I got that out of the way. Now you get it. This is the pile of absolute garbage that Al Davis was inheriting. But he came into the team, and when he joined the Raiders, he had a mindset that no one in the history of the game, maybe even still to this day, has ever had.
The adage that goes around in professional football, and I hear everyone say it, take what they give you. That all sounds good to everybody, but I always went the other way. We're going to take what we want.
Al Davis was the only man that could have built the NFL into what it is when it was at its best. By going against the norm that was set in place during this time in the NFL, and in the following years, the league was dominated by military-style coaching. Vince Lombardi, Tom Landry, George Halas, these guys ruled with an iron fist, and it worked for the time, and much like them too, Davis was also sort of a military guy. He was fascinated by military strategy in general, especially with World War II, but he differed greatly in many ways. Al Davis was not a man who would be pushed around, even against the most powerful men in the league, as we'll get to, and he fought for his own beliefs, even if it meant being hated by some. And later on in life, Davis would often ask people what they valued most between 5 priorities in life, that being money, fame, glory, power, and love. And Davis always said, love is the least important. Not because he didn't value it, but he always said, I only want to be loved by certain people, not humanity. And that is just one of the many factors that makes the Raiders the Raiders. As in 1963, Al Davis walked into a meeting with the Raiders and was proposed a deal to coach the team for 1 season, and walked out of the meeting with a 3-year contract and full control of football operations. And instantly, the Raiders became the Raiders. The 63 Raiders had the greatest single-season turnaround the game of football had ever seen to that point, going from 1 win to 10, as Al Davis won Coach of the Year, and the Oakland Raiders had the 2nd best offense in the NFL, only behind the Chargers and Al's mentor, Sid Gilman, who he worked under in previous years. So yes, this team was good, they just didn't make the playoffs because, well, the AFL was kind of not run super professionally, but it wasn't about the success of the team, okay? It was about the values instilled into this squad by Al Davis. He used his football knowledge gained from Gilman as well as his own ideologies to now officially birth the Oakland Raiders, and Davis understood this was a game of fear, of intimidation, especially back in the day, and famously said, in the first 5 to 10 plays of a football game, the quarterback must go down, and he must go down hard. And on offense, he emphasized the vertical game, throwing the ball down the field and trying to score on every single play. Any Al Davis team from now on would have that intention of hitting hard and staying aggressive on offense. And Davis believed this was a formula that could not only eventually bring a Super Bowl to Oakland, but turns out he was thinking way bigger than football. And this philosophy and renegade attitude from Davis would eventually blossom into a brand surrounding the silver and black that no sports franchise has ever been able to replicate. But that's for later, because for now, we're still in the bloody 60s. So, I mean, you clicked on this video, you know this is going to be a slow burn, as through 1965, the Raiders continued to progress but never made the playoffs, all the while acquiring the future Raiders legend himself, Fred Biletnikoff, who was just a wild dude. If you don't know anything about him, just think what 1960s football means to you, and the man you're envisioning is Fred Biletnikoff. His pregame routine involved chain-smoking cigarettes, vomiting up everything in his stomach, and covering himself in stickum, which was basically just glue, which was entirely legal back then for some reason, and his routines would also involve himself just lathering himself in head to toe. There's so many pictures of him doing that, and this also meant that every time he caught a pass, the ref had to like completely go get a new one, because the ball was just cooked. And because he had this glue on him for the entire game, and he also had like a gum addiction, the Raiders trainers would have to feed him gum, and even at halftime, he would smoke cigarettes, but he couldn't even light it himself, so the trainers had to do that too. How romantic. So, luckily, by this time in 1966, the Raiders had their own stadium now. They were no longer playing high school ball, and they got a stadium in O.Co Coliseum, as it would later be known, which was a literal piece of dog shit, but it was our piece of dog shit, damn it, and the players loved it. They routinely hung out and drunk with fans after the game, and the stadium itself was paid for with $25.5 million of taxpayer money. Literally, the entire complex was paid for. But while the Raiders were still figuring things out, mainly trying to find a quarterback, because how does this man keep showing up in my fucking videos? While that whole thing was going on, Al Davis was also involved in something else pretty hard, and that had to do with changing the entirety of football's future, when the AFL basically came to him and said, hey, you're smart, you know how to get what you want, so you're the commissioner of the league now. Fix our problems. And so he basically did. It's sort of hard to explain, but after being named commissioner of the AFL in 1966, Davis chose war with the NFL, signing a ton of big-name players like, hey, Roman Gabriel and also Mike Ditka, which eventually culminated in the agreement of a merger between the organizations. However, Davis was not a part of this agreement, and it was done entirely without his knowledge. And when he heard of the deal that also made Pete Rozelle the new commissioner of the NFL, this birthed one of the most tense rivalries in sports between two people that never even took the field, which led to Al Davis returning to solely focus on the Raiders. So now we move into 1967, where Al Davis was done coaching and was making some moves, and now the Raiders were really becoming a real force. They started bringing in a ridiculous amount of talent. In 67, they drafted Gene Upshaw, a Hall of Fame guard that never missed a game for his entire 15-year career until 1981, his last year in the NFL, and later became the leader of the entire Raiders team, as well as the president of the NFL Players Association, and was instrumental for the future bargaining agreement. Along with him, the Raiders brought in the Mad Bomber, Darryl LaMonica, trading away Tom Flores, which is just also a banger of a nickname, by the way. We also do that great. We got nicknames for days, and he was an all-pro quarterback. They traded for Willie Brown, too, who basically was the only guy in the Raiders defense in a few seasons from now that wasn't a complete psychopath, and hired a little-known linebackers coach by the name of John Madden, after Bill Walsh, who was on the Raiders staff previously, left. So, you know, that's a thing. So these were all solid moves by Al and the Raiders front office, but all of this would lead to the 67 season, which was one of the weirdest years the Raiders have ever had, and Week 1 might be the weirdest game this team has ever played. In Week 1, the new-look Raiders kicked the ever-loving shit out of the Denver Broncos, as is tradition, and they won the game 51-0, as LaMonica didn't really do much, but that was because he didn't have to. Because meanwhile, Broncos quarterback Steve Tensey, maybe that's his name. I've never heard of this man once, but he went 2 for 12, 17 yards, and had a passer rating of 4.9. And the total yards difference from this game was Raiders 388, Denver -5. I don't even know what happened because I can't find film, but something unholy took place in this game. So the Raiders, still in the AFL league, because the merger with the NFL wouldn't happen officially until prior to the 70 season, absolutely dominated under new head coach John Ross, and went 13-1 and were everything Al Davis wanted. The offense, led by the Mad Bomber, put up the most points in the AFL and NFL, scoring 468 points as LaMonica won the AFL MVP. And the defense did in fact bring the quarterback down hard, averaging 5 sacks a game as the Raiders beat the Oilers in their only AFL playoff game, winning the AFL championship. But they didn't really care about that. Come on now. We're not like the Chargers. We want more. And so the Raiders advanced to the Super Bowl to challenge the greatest coach to ever do it.
Vince Lombardi was carried off the field for the last time.
The Raiders came into 1968 with inarguably one of the best and most impactful draft classes in the history of sports. And I feel like I'm going to say that a lot, but no, this draft was like that. In the second and third rounds, the Raiders took back-to-back Hall of Famers in Kenny the Snake Stabler and Art Shell. And Shell would join Otto and Upshaw on the O-line, while Stabler would in due time become the Raiders quarterback. But there was a reason the former national champion was available in the second round. First of all, he didn't join the Raiders until 1970 because the Raiders sent him to another league, but also he had some injury issues where, just like his QB buddy Joe Namath, Stabler reportedly had to get fluid drained out of his knee after every game. So people weren't sure if he would just never walk again, let alone play in the NFL. But he'll be ready in a few years. But besides those two, the Raiders also drafted George Atkinson, one of the hardest hitters to ever play the game and a legend in Raiders lore. But also, Al Davis selected the first black quarterback in the first round ever with Eldridge Dickey, who was not good, but the Raiders were one of the few teams back then that didn't care at all about anything that didn't have to do with one thing. Could you help the Raiders win? If yes, then you're on the team. He didn't care about ethnicity, gender, nothing like that. And this was back in the 1960s. But interestingly, Al Davis did not get along with head coach John Ross. In 1968, the Raiders were great again. They built on the year before and won 12 games, but Davis and John had some sizzling beef. And throughout this video, a lot of people are going to have beef with Al Davis. And what it boiled down to was John was not a fan of the constant meddling from Davis, and he felt as if he wasn't even the coach of the team. But the 1968 Raiders were very good. Let me make that clear. LaMonica was still in his prime, and the Raiders got all-pro seasons from back Hewitt Dixon, and on defense, Willie Brown and Dan Birdwell were all-pros as well. And statistically, this was the best team in the entire AFL. However, that's not what the 68 Raiders are known for. In a high-profile Week 11 game, the Raiders took on the Jets, and I gotta say, these two teams have an underrated rivalry, or at least, back when we were both good we did, but these teams wanted to rip out each other's guts and feed them to the buzzards. And the Raiders especially hated Joe Namath. To be fair, the whole league wanted to try and assassinate him, but the Raiders went out of their way to destroy him every chance they got, and even Al Davis himself had a framed picture of the Raiders knocking Joe's helmet off in a hit. But in Week 11, the Raiders fell behind, but rallied to score 2 touchdowns and beat the Jets out of nowhere in the final minute of the game. The problem? Well, the TV station didn't think people cared about football, and after the airtime was over, even though the game was still going on, they decided to flip to the airing of Heyy. And with everyone at home not being able to see the legendary game, this was then dubbed the Heyy Bowl, and the Raiders were now the clear kings of the AFL. Sadly, Joe Namath started having sex again, and the Jets were roaring back into relevancy. But the Raiders wanted all the smoke, and they blasted the Chiefs in the divisional round. Kansas City split the season series with Oakland earlier in the season, so people were expecting a bloodbath, but instead, the Mad Bomber bombed. There were bombs everywhere. He had 350 yards and 5 touchdowns back in an era where the average was barely over 200, while Len Dawson had 0 touchdowns and 4 picks. So the Raiders were here, baby. Bring on the New York...
But the play was executed poorly. The Jets took possession at the point of recovery.
A backwards pass? Guys! Okay, to be fair, it was really windy, so it happens, I guess, apparently. And then, I don't know, if you were a Raider fan watching this game live, I don't know how you don't just smash your TV or whatever you're listening to the game on and just proceed to go house 2 packs of Newports. It was that devastating. But luckily, I'm not emotionally attached to this version of the team yet. It just hurts my soul. Not my heart yet, but We'll get there. So the Oakland Raiders lost in devastating fashion, as Don Maynard also got the best of a young Raiders secondary that lacked experience. But they'd be back, and the Jets would go on to win the Super Bowl, so maybe it was destiny for this to happen. But John Ross was gone now, and for all his disagreements with Al and the way he did things, he was a good coach, but two guys can't try and control the same team, and Al Davis then sat down his entire coaching staff and said, hey, I'm down to hire one of y'all if you can prove something to me, and that's when the youngest guy in the room stepped up. And just like that, the legend of John Madden was born. John Madden, before 1969, was very close to becoming the defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers, as after the Raiders failed to bring in Pittsburgh Hall of Fame coach Chuck Noll, Noll himself tried to get his buddy Madden to be the defensive coordinator, but John thought he had a real shot to be the head coach in Oakland, and well, he was right, and John Madden became the youngest head coach in NFL history and was literally perfect for the job. In the NFL, it's often overstated how much blame a coach gets. In recent years, Nick Sirianni has been a pretty good example of this, as after a bad offensive year in 23, a coordinator and personnel change, not a head coaching change, made all the difference in the world. And for a team like the Raiders that already had strong talent on both sides of the ball, what they needed now was someone who understood how the guys operated, not someone who was going to control them per se, because that wasn't really possible, but someone who could weaponize their rage. And John Madden did just that. The 1969 Raiders were great again. They went 12-1, the least losses in a season by a first-year head coach ever, and ain't nobody breaking that record anytime soon. And in the past 3 seasons, the Raiders had lost 4 total regular season games. Their worst season in that sample size was a 2-loss season, and still, the Raiders were led by the same guys. By this point, Fred Biletnikoff had become an All-Pro due to the incredible wide receiver coaching of no! So with LaMonica still in his prime, winning another MVP, the last the AFL would ever give out, and the defense did its thing with Atkinson and Willie Brown, but the Raiders around this time had begun to develop a bit of a reputation as a team that just kept falling short. I mean, it sounds peaceful, I'll be honest, compared to the shit we have to deal with today, but that was the narrative. And after taking down the Oilers in a tight 56-7 game with Darryl LaMonica throwing a career-low 6 touchdowns, and the AFC Championship game was now set. Raiders versus Chiefs. And the Raiders had been just owning the Chiefs. This wasn't even a contest. So, I mean, come on, boys. Let's go in there and do it again. Let's go bitch the Chiefs. Am I right? Let's do it. Well, I'm sure it was a 100% fair-fought game in which the referees had no say in the outcome whatsoever. I mean, the refs have never had any say in any Raider-Chiefs game and have never had any fucking problem with the silver and black ever. I mean, surely this was a game where both teams had an equal chance to win it. It wasn't. This game fucking stung, man, and I feel like I've watched this exact game play out multiple times before, just a different scenario. So the Raiders had the lead, right, and were driving, but then Darryl LaMonica got injured, and in came George Blanda. Now, I promise we'll talk a lot more about him in just a second. This Paleolithic-era fossilized human needs a whole segment, but just know he was old. That was his character trait, and he wasn't very good. And he instantly threw a pick, which then led to a 35-yarder to Otis Taylor, a Chiefs receiver. The only problem was, he not only bobbled the ball, but he had 0 feet in bounds. But they called it a catch anyways. And no, hold on, bring your fucking bitch ass back in here, Raiders. Your beating ain't over yet. Later, there was a phantom pass interference call that brought the Chiefs inside the 10. They scored, won the game, and went on to win the Super Bowl. You love to see it. This is great stuff. Go Chiefs! Funsies, woohoo! And I hope you enjoyed that little excerpt into what is to come, but I don't know, I guess the Raiders kind of harnessed that energy from the year prior and went into 1970 and had one of the most confusing seasons ever. Straight up, the 1970 Raiders were, I don't want to beat around the bush here, the most confusing team the NFL has ever seen. So strap in, we got a weird tale to tell here. Because the football gods saw the injustice that just took place and showed them pity and a whole lot more. They were just on the precipice of greatness, but their time had not come, and so The year began as normal. They were 3-2-1, you know, they just beat Pittsburgh off of 3 touchdowns from George Blanda, sure, but then games started getting a bit wacky. The week after the Steelers game in a rematch versus the Chiefs, KC was up 17-14, and the Chiefs had a 100% win. Like, there is nothing the Raiders could do when Kansas City got a first down and could run out the clock to win the game, right? But then, on that run to get the first down, Raiders defensive end Ben Davidson just demolished Len Dawson, and all of a sudden, a massive brawl took place, which then drew double penalties, and because the rules were all fucked up back then, this negated the run, which then gave the ball back to the Raiders after a punt, and George fucking Blanda tied the game, and that's how it ended. A 17-17 tie off of an intentional fight. Beautiful stuff. Gotta love the early NFL. This then led to the Ben Davidson rule being created. Even though he's not officially credited, this rule changed the way defenders can hit defenseless players, probably for the better, but the utter lunacy had only just begun. You think that's something? Just you wait. 1 week later, the Raiders were facing off against the Cleveland Browns, and let me tell you about George Blanda now. So George Blanda is a guy that, I'm sorry, if you're a big NFL nerd, which, come on, you're still watching this video, and I've been talking about Darryl LaMonica and Dick Wood for the last 20 minutes, so you probably are, but you gotta know about George Blanda. Dude got into the league in the 40s, a few years removed from World War II, and in 1970, he was 43 years old, and the kicker at the same time. Now, he was a former MVP level guy for the Oilers at quarterback in the AFL, and was a QB in Chicago as well, but now he was purely the kicker, unless Darryl got hurt, which in this game versus Cleveland is exactly what happened, and this birthed the most incredible 5-game stretch football has ever seen.
Snap, spotted, it's kicked, that's got a chance, that is good, it's good, holy Toledo, the place has gone wild!
Okay, yeah, he made a kick. Big fucking deal, huh? Well, no. Well, what happened was LaMonica went down, and in came Blanda, who converted on a do-or-die 4th and 15 and scored a game-tying touchdown from Blanda, only for the Browns to throw an interception on the next drive, picked off by Blanda. He didn't play defense, but I don't care. My headcanon says otherwise. But now, backed up in 3rd and 20, the Raiders seemed screwed. All the Browns had to do was not get a penalty, but the Raiders apparently got the penalty, except Cleveland declined it, which gave the Raiders another try, leading George Blanda to kick a 52-yard field goal, which would have tied the NFL record if it wasn't broken by Saints kicker Tom Dempsey on that very same day. Football, everyone. Football is truly a sport. Bruh, what is happening? Since when did George Blanda transform into 2024 Jaden Daniels? Surely this run would come to an end now versus Denver. LaMonica was back, so let's all calm down.
Denver fans celebrated victory, but no one should celebrate victory over the Raiders until they hear a gunshot.
I mean, what do you even want me to say? He somehow managed to get into the game again and win another game at the buzzer, and now it was over. The next week he kicked another game winner, but it wasn't a lack of magic in the Raiders still. It was just transferred to Darryl LaMonica now. But George Blanda also almost won the MVP this year, but let's just act like that didn't happen. And a few weeks later versus the Jets, in a game that was set up to be another great rivalry game, except Joe Namath was cryogenically frozen without a working spine, and Darryl LaMonica had a metal pipe in his ass all day, so it didn't work out, because instead we got some bad football in a windy game, and the Jets we're going to get the win. But apparently this is tradition now, as with time expiring, the team that had already pulled off like 7 miracles in a row invented the fucking Hail Mary.
For Wells in traffic, it's better room. Wells catches the ball. Wells has caught the ball.
Guys, I'm not making this up. This all actually happened. This isn't AI, I swear. After 5 insane endings in about a month, the Raiders then got a bobbled Hail Mary for a walk-off win. I can't do this. But the man who caught this pass was wide receiver Warren Wells, who was arguably even better than Fred Biletnikoff in their primes. But his Pro Bowl career ended after the season as he had some legal problems, which is very uncharacteristic for our legally sound and Christian franchise. But I think we literally just used up all of our luck in one singular season, as we did win our first divisional round game, and we had a hell of a chance to straight up win it all too. This team could have been the gold standard for a lucky season in sports, as their opponent in the AFC Championship game was the Baltimore Colts, who are regarded today as debatably the worst Super Bowl team of all time. But yeah, it didn't go their way. But damn it, it was a beautiful narrative in this one too. It was like the universe would not let George Blanda, who they were now calling the old man of the miracle, sit on the bench. After just 4 passes, LaMonica went down again and outjogged onto the field a 43-year-old man and the nightmare of the Colts. And he popped off. It just wasn't enough though. The Raiders came back from down 0-10, and Blanda's touchdown drive made it just a 3-point game, 17-20. All they needed was one stop, and after dropping a pick and getting a sack, the Raiders allowed a 70-yard touchdown on 3rd and long, ending another agonizing season. So the Raiders ran it back, and by this point, it was clear that at the age of 30, Daryle Lamonica was not going to be the guy to lead the Raiders to a Super Bowl. Yes, he was amazing in the past, but he constantly came up short, and from the beginning, he never really fit in with the established culture of the Raiders. He wasn't out partying with the guys, and it didn't help that last year his confidence was absolutely torn apart, as he had to watch a 43-year-old man steal all the headlines and glory from him, as well as his job, and almost won the Super Bowl in his place. And in 71, LaMonica was also not good. He was always turnover prone, but he finished this season with 16 touchdowns and just 16 picks, and it was only a matter of time before Ken Stabler took his job permanently. But that didn't happen yet, and instead the 1971 Raiders suffered a lot of injuries, and they were once again building something special, but they just weren't there yet. They traded for Bob Brown, a Hall of Fame right tackle who was a Pro Bowler. They drafted linebacker and future cornerstone Phil Villapiano, literally Mr. Raider, and I'll talk about him more in detail in a second, but I can only focus on one guy at a time, and I don't know what else to say, man. Every single dude on this team deserves their own little segment, so that's what I'm going to do. And instead, I'm going to focus on one of the hardest hitters, if not the hardest hitter to ever play the sport, the man nicknamed the Assassin, Jack Tatum.
I'm not only just going to hit you, I'm going to make you regret that you ever played professional football.
When you think of a Raiders defender from the old days, you think of Jack Tatum, a strong safety who wanted only one thing: to bring pain. You do not simply pass the ball over the middle of the field, or you will pay a price. This dude went on record saying multiple times he would rather the receiver catch the pass and then have a clear shot to blow him up after, rather than just, getting a deflection on the play. Intimidation and fear is what he brought to the field, and that was exactly what the Raiders defense wanted, as him and Phil both finished top 5 in Defensive Rookie of the Year voting, as the Raiders just kept trudging forward, improving each year. And in 1972, it looked like they finally were going to get that chance. The 1972 Oakland Raiders had arrived. They had one of the most stacked rosters ever, and they were only going to get better from here too, but I just want to make this clear that they built this roster in less than 10 years with Al Davis in the organization. The starting quarterback was still Daryle Lamonica, with Stabler ready to be set free. Marv Hubbard was a Pro Bowl back, and Fred Biletnikoff was still the guy at receiver, with Cliff Branch, another Hall of Famer, brought in, but he didn't get a shot to be the guy until 74. But the Raiders O-line in 1972 also has a solid case as the best ever. It's a shame that advanced stats don't go back that far, but this O-line had 4 Hall of Famers in their prime, sort of. You could argue Bob Brown and Jim Otto weren't all the way there, but they also had Art Shell and Gene Upshaw. Just disgusting. And the defense was coming together too, but they were still a few pieces out. Now, the reason I'm doing a whole roster overview here is to give credit to not only Al Davis, but to the rest of the Raiders front office and Ron Wolf, the man who doesn't get anywhere near the credit he deserves in being one of the greatest minds in football. And another massive addition to the team was a literal nobody by the name of Otis Sistrunk, a guy who did not go to college and came into the league as a 26-year-old rookie, which led to the Monday Night Football broadcast seeing this old bald dude come out onto the field and said he was from the University of Mars, but he was a dog in the defensive line, as the 72 Raiders ended the regular season on a great note. Lamonica was still a bit underwhelming, but it's hard to find something to complain about when you go into the playoffs on a 6-game winning streak, which led to the divisional round, where one of the NFL's greatest rivalries would be birthed, except it kinda started even before the game. This divisional round game would be between the Raiders and the Steelers, and it would be played in Pittsburgh, which is insanely important, because back in the day, before luxuries were abundant for opposing teams, home field advantage meant a lot, and as you can see by this chart, win percentage was literally at an all-time high in the early 70s, with the home team in the playoffs winning roughly 75% of the time. But the Steelers went a bit beyond just weaponizing their home field advantage on the field, as before the game, Raiders tight end Bob Moore was beaten by multiple police officers in a Steeler fan-infested area, and to this day, he says that he has no memory of the game actually taking place, which then led to John Madden having to pick him up from police custody, and word quickly spread how violent things could get against the opposition in Pittsburgh. Anyways, the game began, and as promised, there was bloodshed. When you get this many Hall of Famers in one field in the early 70s, I mean, that is just unavoidable, and both defenses were dominating. There were 10 total punts and 6 turnovers, with the score sitting at 3-0 Pittsburgh into the fourth quarter. The Raiders looked lifeless, and Daryle Lamonica, man, I get it, he's a Raiders legend. These conditions were also brutal, but in one of the biggest games of his life, he had 45 yards, 2 picks, and a 2.8 passer rating. To be fair, apparently he also had the flu, but now, with the season on the line deep in the fourth quarter, John Madden looked back to his bench and decided to change Raiders history forever. Ken Stabler would have his chance, and immediately, right away, he did this.
Kenny evaded pressure, circled out of the pocket, saw 30 yards of daylight, and ran for it.
Straight off the bench, Kenny the Snake Stabler earned his nickname on a 30-yard scramble on a broken play and gave the Raiders the lead with less than 2 minutes left. For Lamonica, it happened again. Another time, he was replaced and someone else made the hero play. But for the Raiders as a team, this was perfect, which leads us to the play. The Immaculate Reception. Yep. Once again, if I was alive back then watching this live, I know what my reaction would be. It'd be the same reaction I had watching this fucking bullfuckery unfold. I'd just stand there laughing my ass off, because what else can you even do? But man, the conspiracies to this play, they go really deep, and there's just a ridiculous amount of them. So let me start from the least believable ones that I found to the most believable, ignoring the obvious one of Franco just dropping the ball. We'll start off with the least likely scenario to me, which is what Willie Brown said, as apparently when he was on the field, he heard one of the referees making a comment about security first instead of making a decision on the call, implying the ref's security was the reason they called the play they did, rather than incomplete, tying that back to the Bob Moore incident from earlier. Now, that itself is not the wildest claim possible, and definitely could have played a factor, but things get a little bit more interesting when you realize, wait a minute, the refs went over to what looked like a phone booth and made a call to an anonymous source, where nobody will ever really know 100% what took place, but allegedly the call was made to Art McNally, the NFL supervisor at the time, which is weird, and according to most sources, all he did was clarify the rules, not make any suggestions, but once again, what was said on that phone call may never be truly confirmed. But now, things get downright demented. I'm talking if these ever were confirmed, the NFL itself would have a stain on it forever. So, the Steelers-Raiders game was being broadcasted by NBC, and during this time and era, it was common practice for the videotape of this game to cut off with the credits of the producers and all that, right? Except, it was also common for NBC to show additional behind-the-scenes clips and camera angles that do not get saved and archived. You picking up what I'm laying down here? Now meet Frank Cooney, who was a writer for the San Francisco Examiner and already a reputable voice in the NFL writing world, and he decided to record this game himself and review the footage to see truly what happened on the play. And after the credits, he claims that NBC briefly showed an angle that was lost to time, which showed Frenchie Fuqua touching the ball first, which under 1972 rules would have made the catch by Franco Harris illegal, but the play was not included in the original airing, and even darker, may have been scrubbed off the records by the NFL itself. But once again, I'm not trying to convince you it was a catch or not, okay? I'm just laying out what I found. There's just one more thing that I find, fascinating. Directly after the game, Raiders tight end Raymond Chester was sitting in his locker room devastated, because of course he was, only to turn around to be greeted by Frenchie, his old college teammate, and what he told him was 3 short words. It hit me. So yes, we have this reputable source being a Raiders player himself, but this could all be dispelled easily if Frenchie just said it didn't hit him, right? All he has to do is go to the media and say, no, that's bullshit, it didn't touch me. Because, Jack Tatum always made it clear the ball didn't touch him, but no. To this day, Fuqua has continued to remain silent and said, maybe a note will come out after his passing that reveals the truth, but he has constantly said he will never reveal what really happened on the Immaculate Reception. Awesome! Nice! So, we got absolutely fucked over, and the Steelers won their first playoff game ever, and a rivalry was born. And these two teams were built to hate each other now. Both shades of black, but both stood for completely different things, and now both teams became intertwined for the rest of the decade, as for most of this decade, it was the Steelers, the Raiders, Miami Dolphins, and everyone else. And by this point, Al Davis was effectively the owner of the Raiders. Not in name quite yet, but basically he had a pretty sneaky plan to wait until the technical owner, Wayne Weaver, was gone, and then confided the other partners to give him control, and it worked. But the Raiders in '73 continued to be dominant, but they were overshadowed by 2 headlines. One, the benching of Daryl LaMonica, with the keys being handed to Ken Stabler permanently, and drafting a fucking punter in the first round. Ray Guy was the Raiders' first round pick. A punter. But it actually worked. Definitely not the correct pick given the positional value, and I'll be honest, I won't really talk about Ray Guy anymore after this because he's a punter. What do you want me to say? But it's hard to tell someone you made the wrong pick by taking a Hall of Famer in the first round, right? And the team, as usual, finished strong, as in the last game of the year versus Denver to end the season, they went 9-4-1 and won the game by knocking out Broncos Pro Bowl quarterback Charlie Johnson and letting the league know they meant business. And now, I haven't outright said it yet, but around this time, the Raiders were really beginning to get this label of being the villains of the NFL put on them, and they loved it. They embraced every single aspect of that. And they came into the divisional round versus the Pittsburgh Steelers with blood dripping from their eyes. And they didn't even make this game a contest. After a George Blanda field goal, who, yes, is still kicking for the Raiders, Oakland took a 26-7 lead and never looked back. Willie Brown had a pick 6. Franco Harris was held to just 29 rushing yards. And the Steelers were outplayed on every level. But like I said earlier, the AFC, and to some extent the entire NFL, was just 3 teams mainly. And the third team awaited the Raiders, the reigning Super Bowl champions, fresh off an undefeated season with an improved team in 1973 in the Miami Dolphins. And boy howdy was this game weird. Now, I'm all for romanticizing old physical play, but personally, I don't see how people argue that games were straight up more entertaining in the 70s than they are even in like the 90s or in the current passing era, because this game had the least pass attempts by one team in a playoff game to this day. The Dolphins quarterback Bob Griese went 3 for 6, 34 yards, and a pick. And they won by 17. And the crazy thing is, this wasn't like garbage time for the whole thing. No, the Raiders were in this game. They had the ball down by just 10 with plenty of time in the fourth, but on 4th down, Marv Hubbard fumbled, and the Dolphins recovered, from there taking the win 27-10. Damn it. Okay, well, maybe this is just how it's always going to be, huh? Maybe they're just always going to be worse than the Dolphins and the Steelers. But, maybe not, because in 1974, the Raiders were arguably the best team in football, and another massive addition changed things for them as well, and his name was Dr. Death. Skip Thomas, nicknamed Dr. Death, was another weird-ass dude, but a hell of a football player. This guy routinely checked himself into hospitals right after home games, apparently driving his motorcycle into the room, and then just kind of played strip poker with all the nurses there and drank, and can confirm this is This sounds pretty much par for the course for Oakland urgent cares. So the Raiders secondary had 3 dudes with 3 Raider appropriate nicknames: Skip Thomas, Dr. Death, Jack Tatum, the Assassin, and George Atkinson, whose nickname is also the Hitman. And Willie Brown was here too as a Hall of Famer, and this unit was nicknamed the Soul Patrol. So yeah, this is a pretty good defense, right? They only wanted war. And in the last game of the season, just to like prove how demented they were, the Raiders played the Cowboys. And a Raider ended up lying to Jack Tatum and said that Cowboys receiver Bob Hayes was talking all this garbage about them, which led to Tatum fighting him and shoving him to the ground in the player introductions in the tunnel, and proceeded to hold Bob Hayes to 1 catch all game long. And the rest of the defense, now led by Phil Villapiano in the middle, who almost ended up on the injury report this year after falling off a table at a bar, and that pretty much happened every single day, by the way. According to Phil, damn near the entire team would go drink together after every single game in practice. And that sense of a team culture made the Raiders who they were for a whole lot of different reasons, both good and bad. But yeah, by year's end, the Raiders were arguably the best team in football, going 12-2, and were only behind the Skins. But for as good as the Raiders' defense was, Oakland's offense had arrived. Ken Stabler and Cliff Branch became the most dangerous quarterback-wideout combo in football, as Cliff averaged 18 yards per reception and led the league in receiving yards, and Ken Stabler was the MVP of the league. A 94.9 passer rating was an anomaly for the time, and although he was just second in the league, him and Ken Anderson were 9 points of passer rating ahead of third place. But Stabler did even more. He was the leader off the field, the leader on the field, while the Raiders' offense scored the most points in football, had the most total yards of offense, and the most touchdowns. And this offense was complementing the best secondary in football. This team was Al Davis's dream team. The Raiders threw it deep and it worked. They had the most valuable player in football, the best deep threat, and the hardest hitting defense in the entire NFL. But that's the tragedy of the regular season in this era. It really didn't matter. So it was just still Dolphins, Steelers, Raiders for the AFC crown. And despite ridiculous seasons from all 3 teams, the Raiders had to go against the dynasty Miami Dolphins, who were on a quest for a damn three-peat. So riddle me this, Batman. What do you get when you cross a hungry team looking for a three-peat and a wild, rabid dog? I'll tell you what you get. You get what you fucking deserve. An all-time great game. Sorry for that, I was mixing jokers. But the Raiders and Dolphins wanted to destroy each other, and this game was dead even. When one team scored, the other answered. When the Raiders got clamped, so did Miami, but a special team score was the difference, and just a 19-14 Fins lead in the fourth was not even a little bit safe. And so, with the season on the line, the Raiders turned to their 2 most trusted players, Ken Stabler and Cliff Branch. And what happened? A 72-yard bomb for a score. But right away, Miami responded with a haymaker carrying a fistful of lead right to the Raiders' melon, and all hope seemed lost. 21-26. The Raiders trailed, and this whole season, their best roster in franchise history was about to go up in flames. But regardless of the odds, once again, they relied on Ken Stabler. And maybe I wouldn't make the argument for this, but you could argue that Ken Stabler is the most clutch quarterback in the history of football. And at least in this very game, he had one of the most clutch drives in NFL history. Stabler was completely falling down, rolling to the side, and just threw the ball in the air with a prayer in mind, and it worked. The Raiders won the game, officially known as the Sea of Hands, on a broken play. But a win is a win. Now, here's the issue. The Raiders just kind of used all their resources to win with what many fans were calling the real Super Bowl. So when the Steel Curtain Pittsburgh Steelers faced them and were better than ever before, it also, like last year, was not even a contest. Well, except it sort of was. Once again, I don't want to give any excuses here. The Steelers were the better team on this day, but the Raiders began to Raider. The team had a 10-3 lead in the fourth quarter, and they held Terry Bradshaw to under 100 yards, but in the biggest moment this time, they imploded. They completely imploded. The Snake had 3 picks, but all game long, the Raiders had been losing in the trenches, and now it was costing them. Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier both ran for about 100 yards, leading to 210 total, while the Raiders had 29. 29 to 210 rushing yards. This led to 21 straight points by the Steelers, who beat the Raiders again, and then finally got over the hump themselves and won the Super Bowl, while the Raiders, well, they failed again. And the 75 season was a step into darkness. Utter and sheer depression engulfed and consumed the entire team. Injuries destroyed the team, nerfing them severely. Willie Brown battled injuries all year and was never 100%. Biletnikoff went down with a season-ending injury in Week 13, but the biggest loss they suffered was before the season, when Jim Otto retired and called it a career, but he finally earned his chance to rest, and boy was it needed. Jim Otto is a rare type of human. When a dude says out loud that they're the toughest man alive, they're either 100% capping or somehow understating things. So Jim Otto played in an era where the medical team literally did not give a single flying fuck, and so the man ended his career reportedly having about 70 to 75 surgeries and 28 knee surgeries alone. I went, what? 28? To be fair, I guess that was his whole life, not just his pro career, but still, man, what the hell? He almost had to have his leg amputated, things were that rough, but without Otto here, the Raiders were a bit of a different team. And on top of that, the Raiders started 1975 off with 5 straight road games, and they were still good, but you get it at this point, right? The Raiders were just a tier below the Steelers and Dolphins, but if they wanted to win a Super Bowl, they had to overcome both of those teams, and then whoever came out of the NFC too. But first, they had to get through the Bengals, which was a sweaty playoff game itself. Now, the Raiders' defense, as I've already gone over an exhausting amount of times, was really, really good, but they were missing a big piece all year long, that being Hall of Fame linebacker Ted Hendricks, who was a menace for the Colts back in that AFC Championship game from earlier, but on the Raiders so far, he just wasn't playing. He only started 5 games all year, but with no limitations in the divisional round versus Cincinnati, Hendricks saved the day and got 4 sacks as the Raiders won a thriller and moved on. But now who was it going to be, huh? Miami or the Steelers? Which team was going to ruin our hopes and dreams this season and absolutely piss all over them? It was Pittsburgh. The 2 teams that represented everything the 70s in the NFL went to battle again, and once more, it was ugly, ugly, ugly. This might be the worst performance by a quarterback ever in a win, too. Pretty much everyone in their pet mongoose believes religiously that Terry Bradshaw is wildly overrated to the point where I don't even know if that's possible to call him overrated anymore, but it's games like these where people point to for why he's overrated. In the biggest game of the season, he threw 3 picks, and the Steelers as a whole fumbled 3 times, but luckily for them, the Raiders were worse. While the Steelers had 7 total turnovers, the Raiders had 5 and made constant mistakes over and over again to dig themselves into a deeper hole. And with the game at 3-0 Pittsburgh going into the 4th, the Raiders offense was asleep and never woke up, as Al Davis was pissed off at pretty much every point from this game, saying we just screwed things up, and the Steelers beat the Raiders again in another horribly cold weather game, 16-10, and would go on to win another Super Bowl. I mean, this team is just never gonna win, right? This is just how it's always gonna be. I mean, they've been sending Lynn Swann to the hospital like every single game versus the Steelers, but it just didn't matter. It was just constant failure and disappointment. But I guess if we're going to play devil's advocate, there is another way of looking at this scenario, and it's not all grim. Because, you know, in a vacuum, this Raiders era has been incredible. Under Madden, Stabler, and a barbaric defense, the Raiders haven't won less than 9 games since 1971, and in the last 3 years, literally for 3 straight seasons, they lost in the playoffs to an all-time great team that went on to win the Super Bowl themselves. So there's no shame in having heated rivalries with the best of the best, but come on now, we've gone over this. Al Davis does not fucking settle. He wants it all. He wants to win. And going into the 1976 season, the Raiders' opponent in Week 1 was the defending Super Bowl champion Steelers, the perfect chance to set the tone for the season. Madden stressed the importance of this game. Davis did the same, but the players who partied more than any other NFL team also knew when to lock in as well. And so they did just that. But for a while, it didn't look like the Raiders were going to win. The Steelers were actually beating the shit out of them 28-14 in the 4th quarter, but out of nowhere, the Raiders fought back. But they believed in themselves the whole time. They never had any doubt that they weren't going to come back and steal this game away. Dave Casper, the Raiders tight end, who had a combined 97 yards in his first 2 seasons, started getting his chance and got a big touchdown as he would go on to make an all-pro team, but that cut the lead to just 7. The Raiders got the ball back, scored again, and now sadly a field goal did win the game for the Raiders, but it wasn't by George Blanda anymore, as after the 1975 season, the man who played in the 1940s in the NFL decided to call it a career. But the Raiders won the game, yeah! And the aftermath was, hella goofy, okay? So George Atkinson likes to hit people. Kind of a lot. One might even argue too much. And Chuck Noll, the Steelers head coach, was one of those people who believed in that argument. And after this game, the beef between these two teams went off the field and got taken to court. See, afterwards, Chuck Noll told the media that the Raiders play a game without football in mind, and said there's a criminal element to the way the Raiders play football, and accused Atkinson of being a part of that. And so George sued him. He took him to court and filed a lawsuit against Noll, but the case was eventually thrown out. But the Raiders wanted to send a message that if you mess with us, we're getting it back in blood, and no less. And so the Raiders took their anger out on the rest of the NFL and fielded one of the best football teams the NFL has ever seen.
Going deep to Cincinnati. Touchdown Raiders!
13 wins, 1 loss. Top 5 offense, top 5 defense. This team was unbelievable. However, in Pittsburgh, the Steelers also had one of the best teams of all time. They started the year out 1-4, but from there they won every game left on their schedule and had the #1 offense in the league, and had also one of the greatest single defenses ever in a season, allowing the 3rd least points of all time in a year since the merger at just 9.9 a game. But the wildest thing about this Raiders-Steelers dynamic this year was the Raiders had a chance to eliminate Pittsburgh from the playoffs before the postseason even began. In the Raiders' second to last game to end the season, they faced the Cincinnati Bengals. And if the Bengals beat the Raiders, this would give Cincy the division title and Pittsburgh would miss the playoffs. But that's not how the Raiders do things. And so the decision on what to do in this game was not a discussion. They would go out there and kick the shit out of Cincinnati, which they did, and would await the Steelers if the time came for the rematch to happen. But let me chill for a second, because the 1976 Raiders roster was absolutely loaded, and I gotta get my stat bag first here, okay? Because by the end of the regular season, the 76 Raiders averaged 24.3 points per game, which was good enough by DVOA metrics to be ranked as the 5th best offense in football. But they did average the most points per game, too, as Ken Stabler had his best year as a pro, and honestly really should have won MVP. He led the league in completion percentage, passing touchdowns, touchdown percentage at 9.3. Absolutely unheard of stuff even today. 9.4 yards per attempt, and did all of this chucking deep while having the best passer rating in football at 103.4. There was no quarterback more valuable to their team than Ken Stabler was to the Raiders this year. And with Branch Biletnikoff, Mark Van Eegen as the back, and Dave Casper as the tight end, the Raiders averaged 30.5 points per game in the last 6 games of the season, as these John Madden teams just always played their best football in late December. But the team also had some odd dudes on it. I already talked a bit about Ted Hendricks being an amazing player and Raiders legend, but like I said earlier, he was kind of benched for 1975 because the Raiders couldn't figure out where to use him, and he even wore his famous mask in that NFL film shot protesting being benched. And before this season, Ted decided to pull up to training camp on a horse with a traffic cone on his head, and this clearly inspired some great men to do similar things in the future. So this has always been our thing, right? We've always taken in the outcasts and given them one more chance, and although Ted Hendricks wasn't like an outcast, he was an amazing player before, another guy in John Matuzak was exactly that. In 1973, the Oilers took the 6'8", 270-pound defensive end first overall, but his career flamed out quickly, and after some more disappointment in Kansas City, he ended up on the Raiders, and everything he said and did made him a Raider in spirit, pretty much. He was once quoted as saying, "The only thing he ever put in his body was Cheese Whiz, bagels, and Crown Royal whiskey," with his life slogan being, "You can get bruised when you cruise with the twos." All right then, welcome to the Raiders. So this roster was just loaded. We had Ken Stabler, Mark Van Egan, Fred Biletnikoff, Cliff Branch, Dave Casper, Art Shell, Gene Upshaw, Jack Tatum, George Atkinson, Dr. Death, Willie Brown, Phil Villapiano, John Matuzak, and I could keep going. This roster had so much talent on it. And every single guy also had their own little like quirk to them, and Gene Upshaw himself, even as a lineman, had it, where he would, there's always those like iconic pictures of him with two massive clubs for hands, and what he would do is he would dunk his hands in like water with cloth, and they would harden by the time the game began, and he would just be swinging around slapping dudes. And from the research that I did, it hurt a lot to get hit by those. So yeah, the Raiders won 13 games, partied harder than everyone and played harder too, and continued to dominate under the only coach in the history of the game that could contain these guys. But then, if that's true, what the fuck happened in the divisional round? Because holy fucking McShit in my ass, the Raiders got the luckiest they probably have ever gotten in their entire franchise's history. So the thing with this Raiders team was they were 100% focused on one thing, the Steelers and winning the AFC Championship game. That they just kind of disrespected their opponent. And this was a damn good Patriots team, led by Russ Francis and Mike Haynes, who will be back. They were a very underrated team and pounced on the Raiders early to go up 21-10. So again, the Raiders were falling behind and could go down in the playoffs before they even got a shot to see Pittsburgh. Now, yes, again, they fought. Stabler brought it within 4 now, but still, the odds were not in their favor. They got the ball back again, but it was 3rd and 18, and things were pretty fucking grim. But then, man, this is great. So far, we haven't really had any Raiders pain, and we're going to get Patriots pain even before that. So, I don't know what else to say. Maybe there's some karma in this play in the future. Who knows? Maybe we had a horrible call go against us in about 30 years or so. But for this one moment, we got bailed out by the refs.
Goes incomplete on our sideline, and then we see the flag. And then they call the roughing the passer. And I look at the replay and I said, you gotta be kidding me.
Yep, Patriots fans over 60 are still pissed to this day, but this really was not a good call. I mean, yes, I guess technically contact was made with the helmet, but come on now, this was the 70s, man, and this call gave the Raiders life. They scored and won the game 24-21, barely surviving the Patriots and earning themselves another date with the Steel Curtain. And yes, the Steelers blew out the Colts in their last playoff game, but they suffered some wounds, as both Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris would be out for the AFC Championship game versus the Raiders, and honestly, they're lucky they didn't lose some fans too, because in that game, a plane just crashed into the stadium. But this left the Steelers with 0 rushing game whatsoever, meaning it was time for their Hall of Fame quarterback to step up with the season on the line and make magic happen. 44 passer rating. Nice. Just love to see it, man. I can't even play up the drama. This is just a boring storytelling performance. Why? Why'd you do this, Terry Bradshaw? But the Raiders pitched a shutout in the second half, holding the Steelers scoreless, and just kind of beat down a wounded animal with a granite meat cleaver for 60 minutes straight. And they did it. In the year of the snake, Kenny Stabler led the Raiders to the Super Bowl, their second ever in franchise history. And this time, Al Davis and the Raiders would not let this opportunity go to waste. Raiders vs. Vikings in concept was kind of the perfect Super Bowl because although the Raiders did have a lot go their way, remember the Patriots game had the roughing call and the Steelers had injuries to their running backs, but this was their moment because from a narrative perspective, it was kind of similar to like Chargers vs. Panthers in a Super Bowl nowadays. These were two teams that have constantly choked recently trying to shed a narrative of, well, choking, and Raiders vs. Vikings was exactly that. So the Raiders were doing their own thing before the Super Bowl, right? They were partying and forgot what dimension they were in for a few days, but when it came time to lock in, they did. And there was actually little controversy before this game, except for on Minnesota's side, there was a small detail that, the Vikings just guaranteed a Super Bowl win. Before the game, nobody remembers this, but they didn't learn from Joe Namath. And damn it, Minnesota, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Why did you do this? But they didn't listen. And the football gods were ready to punish them for their arrogance. But meanwhile, the Raiders had a job to do, and before the game, the Raiders got a speech from Al Davis telling the team they had a chance to become immortal, and that the NFL would be forced to respect the Raiders. Sure, we might be villains, outlaws, ruthless hitters, but damn it, we could be Super Bowl champions. And also before the game, John Madden gave one of the most famous speeches in NFL history, saying, "Guys, this will be the single biggest event of your entire lives, as long as you win." And the Raiders started fucking it up right away, man. This team, with probably the most confident, nonchalant quarterback to ever play the sport in Ken Stabler, went right down the field, but got stalled up and attempted a 29-yard field.
And he hits the upright again! That's impossible!
Great. Yeah, great stuff, y'all. Fucking 29-yarder. Can't do it. Unbelievable. And then they got a fucking punt blocked. And all of a sudden, the Vikings were on the 2-yard line. Score 0-0, with nothing but 2 simple yards keeping them from getting the first touchdown in the Super Bowl. But then the Raiders defense made an all-time great play, plugged the hole perfectly, and forced a fumble. Raiders ball. And from there, it was all silver and black. Stabler and the Raiders offense was just putting ass to belt, taking a 16-0 lead, and then one of the most iconic plays in sports took place. All game long, Willie Brown had realized that Vikings quarterback Fran Tarkenton had a specific drop back for when he threw it to the side of the field where he was on. And with the cushion of a double-digit lead, before the play even happened, Willie Brown decided he was going to jump the next route he got a chance to jump. And when Fran dropped back and set off Willie's trap, Willie Brown jumped the route, and then we got the iconic call itself, along with one of the most known NFL film shots to this day. 32-7. 32 points in the Super Bowl, and the Raiders delivered one of the most dominant single-game performances in the Super Bowl era. 429 yards of offense for a defensive-oriented team. Fred Biletnikoff won the Super Bowl MVP with just 4 catches, but they were all immensely impactful. Jack Tatum delivered one of the hardest hits the Super Bowl has ever seen as wide receiver Sammy White lost his helmet to Tatum's wrath. And they did it. The Raiders won the Super Bowl. Just, well, what a thing to say out loud, man. The Oakland Raiders were Super Bowl champions, and according to the SRS score, which measures a team's strength, they also won the hardest Super Bowl in league history. Did they get lucky? Yes, but as John Madden was hoisted up, the Raiders did what they set out to do and became immortal. And surely it's only up from here. But before we go any further, let's talk protein, okay? Because I be lifting, you know how it be, and I'm actually trying to hit my protein goal of about 150 grams every single day, which, you know, is kind of difficult if I'm not eating 5 chicken breasts a day, but, you know, you also don't want to just pound yourself with random artificial junk, because that's not a good idea either. And that's why I'm teaming up with Transparent Labs. Their grass-fed whey protein isolate is actually clean and, you know, has ingredients that you can actually pronounce, which helps me a lot hit my numbers without stressing about what's in it. And it honestly tastes good too. My favorite right now is the milk chocolate because I like, you know, mixing it with the desserts and stuff because I got a bit of a sweet tooth, but it just goes down easy every time and it doesn't mess with my stomach whatsoever. Plus they've got like so many different flavors that are all completely natural, which is amazing for someone like me who gets sick of the same flavor over and over again, and you have the ability to switch it up and actually look forward to what you want. And every single scoop has 28 grams of protein. Once again, it's all grass-fed, and there's no dyes, no filters, no artificial sweeteners, plus it's all third-party tested, so you actually know what you're putting in your body. And if you want to try it out, they're hooking me up with this free starter kit when you subscribe, so you get the shaker and a sampler of 5 flavors to figure out which one works best for you. Plus, if you use my link down below, you'll also get 10% off automatically. So if you're trying to clean up your protein game and try to get a bit more gains in the gym yourself, or just try to hit any form of protein goal, because remember, protein isn't just for lifting, check out Transparent Labs. They do great stuff. And thanks to them for sponsoring this video. But with that, let's get back to the video. We'll answer that statement, I guess, in a minute or two, but if you want to prolong success, you can't just stick with the same old dudes year after year after year. And the big addition to the Raiders in 1977 was Lester the I can't say that nickname, but Lester Hayes, a 5th round pick, wasn't immediately impactful, but in his rookie season, he was introduced to a little something called Stickum, the glue thing that I mentioned earlier with Fred Biletnikoff, and Lester Hayes took the mantle from Fred for that and became the NFL's new face for Stickum. So the Raiders entered 1977 with a sense of urgency. This core was beginning to age, and they wanted a repeat badly. Ken Stabler was 32, Cliff Branch 30, Biletnikoff was 84, and the defense was getting up there as well. Willie Brown was 37 as a quarterback, and their youngest secondary player was still Dr. Death, who was 27 years old. So when things didn't go the Raiders' way early on in the season, with Phil Villapiano suffering a massive season-ending injury in just week 2, a massive blow was dealt to not only the team's talent, but the ego as well, as not only did they lose their Pro Bowl linebacker, they lost one of the leaders of their defense too. I mean, the one full healthy game the whole team played together was a 24-0 shutout versus the Chargers. And then week 2 was another installment of Raiders versus Steelers, where Pittsburgh was pissed off because last year they didn't have their two backs and they thought they would have won with them. But I don't know if that was really the issue, because Terry Bradshaw played better than he did last game, I guess, but 50 passer rating is still not getting it done. And Bradshaw threw 3 more picks, so although yes, injuries took down the Raiders a level, they were still arguably the favorites to make it out of the AFC. The Raiders kept going, but they showed weakness time and time again. Ken Stabler started showing signs of regressing this season as he threw for 40 yards and was benched in a game. The defense had regressed, and the Raiders had to play on the road all playoffs long. And remember, this is the 70s, which is a huge deal. And also remember Marv Hubbard, their 3-time Pro Bowl running back? Well, he was hurt in 76, and this year, before the season, he was traded for a solid return of $100. Okay then, call me crazy, but I don't really see the vision there. And now their opponent in the divisional round was the Colts, led by the most random MVP season ever from one-time Pro Bowl quarterback Burt Jones. So this was not going to be free. Yes, they were favored and the Raiders were probably the better team, but these two teams engaged in another one of the greatest playoff games ever. And by that, I mean, it came down to which team could choke less. The Raiders and the Baltimore Colts. This was a classic old school matchup. Early on, the Raiders jumped out to a 7-0 lead and were doing Raider things. They threw the ball deep, they sacked Burt Jones a ton, and with the ball back, they had a chance to... Look
out, there he goes! He's gone! He's gone!
Okay, but luckily the game was still anyone's to take, and a few minutes later, Burt Jones threw a fucking duck straight to the Raiders, who caught the...
Interception. Oh, dropped by Jack Tatum. He had it.
After the drop, the Raiders needed to lock in. Come on, boys. A two-peat was on the line here. Dave Casper caught a touchdown, and he was ready for his breakout game, because this was a guy who was almost forced to play lineman by the Raiders, but he ended up losing 30 pounds in an offseason, and with Raiders tight end Bob Moore now taken by the Buccaneers in the expansion draft, Dave Casper was unleashed, and all the Raiders had to do was not allow a kickoff for a touchdown.
He is going to run it back for a touchdown.
Okay, now things are gonna get steamy here. No more hard cuts, I promise. But all of a sudden, the Colts had a lead, following some back and forth scores, and sat comfortably at 31-28. The only problem was there was plenty of time left on the clock, and the snake was on the other side of the field, wearing silver and black. And you do not give the ball back to Ken Stabler. But this time, the clip was empty, and instead the Raiders punted it back to the Colts. Luckily for the Raiders, their defense, led by some insane plays from John Matuzak, stuffed them, and this led to the real last chance for the Raiders. One more shot to keep the dream alive, and they had to sleeve up their trick. So all day long, they've been running an in-route play, but apparently a man on the coaching staff by the name of Tom Flores noticed the Colts safety overplaying the route, and so instead they sent the ghost to the motherfucking post. They did the thing. Another iconic Raiders moment with a cool name. Except this play actually didn't ice the game and didn't even score, and instead they kicked a field goal to tie it 31-31. And in overtime, the Colts had a chance to win the game, but they blew it. They completely choked. They had a wide open receiver, but Burt was just a bit off in his pass, and the Raiders got the ball back, converted an impossible 3rd and 19, and instead of going for a field goal like a pussy, John Madden trusted his men. He took a handful of his own ball sack and found Dave Casper for the touchdown, and the silver and black stood victorious. But low-key, Dave Casper had a coming-out party. He had a weird game with 3 touchdowns, but only 4 catches as well. And also, Raiders linebacker Monty Johnson also casually played one of the best linebacker games you'll ever hear, as he had 20 tackles, 2 sacks, and finished the game with a broken neck. A dude just casually shrugged off a career-ending injury. So they did it. I mean, at this point, this was their 5th straight AFC Championship appearance, which is pretty damn good. Actually, it's 3rd most all-time right now. So not bad stuff. And at this point, they'd gone through 4 straight all-time great teams. And now standing in front of them was the Denver Broncos, who were by far and away the easiest final boss they'd faced to make the Super Bowl. And not saying this Broncos team wasn't good, as they did have a ferocious defense, which was called the Orange Crush. Led by All-Pro Lyle Alzado, the Raiders were the better team, but this defense was amazing. And early on, the Raiders did not do all that well. By the 3rd quarter, they had played poorly even. The offense didn't score a single touchdown, and they trailed 3-7. And even worse, Denver was driving. And even worse, they were on the goal line and about to score. But remember, the Raiders like to hit people very, very hard, and Jack Tatum ass-blasted Broncos rookie running back Rob Lidle, forcing a fumble in a very similar play that changed the Super Bowl just a year prior, and the ball was recovered by a fat guy who began running to the end zone. But wait!
Lidle! Oh, what a hit by Jack Tatum. The Raiders say they have the football, but I believe the whistle was blown dead.
What? Yeah, you fucking crinkle-nosed, dick-cheesed, head-ass zebra. What in God's name was that? Look at this replay. Open your eyes and tell me you see down by contact. Oh, whatever. What's the point? So instead of it being 10-7 Raiders, the Broncos got it back, went up 14-3 and held off another strong Stabler comeback to win it 20-17, where afterwards the refs admitted that they didn't see the fumble and said, sorry, it was our fault, we didn't mean to do that. And from here on out, the refs and the Raiders had a great relationship, and it was all uphill from here. What's wrong with me? All right, what a fair and honest game. I mean, for some franchises, a play like that would be their most painful moment in their entire existence, and for us, it's arguably not even in our top 10, and most of you probably didn't even know this play happened. God, I hate this team, but God, I love this team. All right, so nice. After that teabag by the refs, worthy of a Halo 3 montage, the Raiders started off 1978 with a one-of-a-kind beginning to the year, and it was not for a good reason. You know, when I start talking about the preseason, shit is going down. And yeah, before the 78 season, the Raiders and Patriots played in the most infamous preseason game of all time, where on a routine play, Patriots wide receiver Derek Stingley, who had just finished contract negotiations and was set to be one of the highest paid wide receivers in the NFL, ended up never having that contract be signed, as he was targeted on a pass over the middle of the field, and that's when Jack Tatum hit him. But this wasn't an overly ruthless hit either. It was just a normal safety boomstick, except this one play left Stingley paralyzed on the floor. When Tatum hit Darryl, his spinal cord compressed, and he was wheelchair bound for the rest of his life. It was a tragedy, and John Madden himself said it was the saddest thing he's ever seen on a football field, as Madden made it a priority to rush straight to the hospital after the game, but when he arrived, he found that there was pretty much no one else there. No Patriots players, owners, nobody. It was just John Madden and eventually Stingley's family, but that was the guy that he was. He was a player's coach through and through, and that's one of the few qualities that made him such a great coach and a one-of-a-kind man. But the backlash was unprecedented. Jack Tatum was already called the assassin, already labeled as one of the guys that was teetering on the edge between intentionally hurting people and hitting people. But now, people really went after Jack. But Tatum stood on his ground. He said he tried to visit Stingley afterwards, but he was turned away by his family as they didn't want anything to do with him. And he caught even more flack later on for saying he's sorry about what happened to him, but he'll never apologize for the way he played, which I agree with. Once again, this was not a dirty hit. You can argue about other certain hits, but it was just a 1 in a billion freak play. It just so happened to include the man who represented the most violent era of football ever to be played. So it was time for 1978, and this year parity was at an all-time high, and that was not a good thing for the Raiders, who had been the most consistent part about the entire decade. And the main reason for their fall off was sadly their quarterback Ken Stabler, who technically speaking had one of the worst seasons a Hall of Famer has ever had in their prime, as to start the year from weeks 1 through 3, he was averaging 197 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 picks a game, and a passer rating of just 41.1. Now, he did, improve from here, because otherwise he would have been cut, but not by much, as he ended his 78 campaign with a 3.9 touchdown percentage and a 7.4 interception percentage. And this was good enough for second in the NFL in total picks behind Fran Tarkenton, who threw just 2 more picks, but about 200 more passes. And Stabler had the lowest passer rating out of any full-time starter in the league. So that's not ideal, but I guess luckily for the Raiders this season, it was overshadowed by one of the most Raider plays ever. I tell ya, we get fucked by the football gods, but damn it, every now and then, we get a play like the Holy Roller, where the Raiders were cooked. The Chargers had them beat 20-14, but with 10 seconds left, Ken Stabler, instead of getting sacked, chose to fumble it on purpose, and the ball rolled and rolled and rolled until it got into the end zone, and it was ruled a touchdown. And the Raiders got away with one, as Ken Stabler even admitted after the fact that he did just launch the ball forward on purpose. But yeah, the 78 Raiders were aging and losing pieces fast. By this point, Willie Brown, George Atkinson, and Skip Thomas were all gone, and the offense looked like it needed new leadership. And they were gonna need even more leadership than ever before, because after missing the playoffs, John Madden, one of the best coaches of all time, retired from football at the young age of 42. People didn't even begin coaching most of the time before they reached 42, and his career was done. He coached his entire career for the Silver and Black and truly was a one-of-a-kind man. John Madden was the only coach who could have brought together the Raiders in the 1970s. According to Stabler, he was very lenient with the players and who they were, and the players appreciated that deeply and felt they had to repay him by going out there and winning for him. He was loyal, he was tough, and he won football games. And still to this day, John Madden racked up 103 regular season wins in 10 years, a 7.59 win percentage, the best of all time since the merger. So who was going to replace John Madden? Well, there's no replacing John Madden. That's just impossible. But Al Davis wanted to keep the culture steady and knew he had to hire from within yet again, and brought in a guy who had been with the team effectively since its formation in 1960, making their former quarterback and receivers coach Tom Flores not only John Madden's successor, but the first minority head coach ever. And so Tom Flores was the head coach. And they also picked up a former first overall pick in Jim Plunkett. And these two would change the Raiders' history forever. So once again, Al Davis was just very ahead of his time. And by this point, the Raiders had a record of 159, 56, and 11. A 74% chance to win any game they've played in since 1963, which was by far the best in the league. But the writing was on the wall for Ken Stabler. He needed to chill, taking advantage of the Broncos cheerleader scandals and lock in for some football. But going into 79, the Raiders had a bit of a problem. Their division was getting pretty fucking nuts. The Seahawks and Broncos both won over 9 games and were strong teams, but specifically the San Diego Chargers had the best team in football. Dan Fouts was leading a revolutionary style of offense, and they went 12-4 and blew out the Raiders in week 2. So just being a solid team was not going to cut it anymore. And it did not. It's a shame because Ken Stabler rebounded pretty nicely from last season, but it wasn't enough. The defense regressed more, and with 2 straight years without a first-round pick to use, the young talent was beginning to wane, but the old core was also all but gone after the season. Jack Tatum, the last member of the Soul Patrol left, was traded after the season to the Oilers, but the assassin at least gave one more moment when he crossed paths with the young MVP of the league and running back Earl Campbell, who scored here because he's also a beast, but he took a lick from Jack Tatum and fell over on his back, still saying to this day that was the hardest hit he ever took in his entire career. Which is interesting because later on in life, Jack Tatum would write a book, and he was also very pro player safety, which you wouldn't think from a guy who's labeled as the most violent player to ever play the game, but that's who Jack Tatum was. He was always just a misunderstood player, and his legacy as a Raider will never be forgotten. But after 1979, the Raiders missed the playoffs, and hope for 1980 was a bit grim, because literally right before the season began, Al Davis decided to announce his plan to move the Raiders from Oakland to Los Angeles, with or without the NFL's permission. And the NFL and its owners unanimously voted against the Raiders moving to Los Angeles, but Come on now, you get what Al Davis is all about at this point, and he was not about to let the league win this round, and eventually signed a deal anyways with the LA Coliseum, but this betrayal most Raiders fans felt seemed like it was gonna weigh on the 1980 season. But instead, and I know I keep ending these things off with drama, but this team is crazy, man, and in 1980 we had another magical season. Now, the big change from 79 to 80 was the trading away of Ken Stabler. The Raiders legend won a Super Bowl with them, was the embodiment of what it meant to even be a Raider, and he was also a weird guy. I mean, reportedly the dude collected, I repeat, collected the panties of all the girls he slept with and put them on his wall as trophies, but everything must come to an end at some point, and the Raiders traded him away to the Oilers for Dan Pastorini in effectively a quarterback swap. And they also traded again with the Oilers and gave them Dave Casper for a few picks. And although they didn't get any huge pieces with the picks from the Casper trade directly, but in typical Raiders fashion, they did find a gem in the second round of the 1981 draft. But we'll get there soon enough. Specifically, the Stabler trade was kind of a lose-lose. While Stabler's Hall of Fame career flamed out, Dan's was put into the grave that led directly to a sewer, because right away it was clear things were not working out. He had 8 picks through 5 games, and Tom Flores had to do something. But then Pastorini broke his leg anyways, and he never played for the Raiders again. I mean, things were really not good. After week 5, the Raiders were 2-3 and had to turn to Jim Plunkett, the eternal bust who had requested a trade last season because he felt like he could play, and the Raiders were not giving him the opportunity. But when Pastorini got hurt versus the Chiefs, Plunkett came in, and with one final chance to revive his career, he threw 5 picks. Which is a lot of picks, believe it or not. But his first 3 official starts were when things got confusing. From weeks 6 through 8, Plunkett averaged 208.3 yards, 2.3 touchdowns, 0 picks, and a 139.9 passer rating, as the Raiders finished with a 9-2 record with Plunkett as the starter. Once again, if this doesn't make sense to you, just imagine that this season the Miami Dolphins had another Tua injury and Zach Wilson stepped up and led the Dolphins to not only the playoffs, but he actually played well doing it. That's how people were looking at the Raiders this season. But the defense was also really good. Old guys like John Matuzak and Ted Hendricks, who was 33 this season but still made an all-pro team, made huge impacts. But the biggest storyline outside of Jim Plunkett's revival was Lester Hayes having the greatest cornerbacking season of all time. The Raiders defense as a whole had the second most sacks in the league and forced the most turnovers with 52. And Lester Hayes was the reason for that with 13 picks, the most by any player since the merger to this very day. But this season from Hayes is a bit controversial, because remember, when I talked about him earlier with Stickum, this season made him famous for that, but it was also a bit too dominant, and the NFL finally banned the substance a year later. But it's not like Hayes was just bad without Stickum. He went on to make multiple Pro Bowl teams without it. It's just when he had that additional advantage, it made him unbeatable. Receivers couldn't do anything versus him. He was one of the greatest man-to-man corners ever and mastered the art of the bump and run, pressing receivers off the line and immediately throwing them off their routes, studying film to find the smallest tendency receivers had, and did everything he could to make them uncomfortable. I mean, he was so good that after this 1 year, teams just straight up didn't even target his side of the field anymore because he was just coated in Stickum, looking like he was cosplaying at a fucking Diddy party. But hey, intimidation is intimidation, and sometimes it's needed. That's probably a Diddy quote now that I think about it. But Lester Hayes won the Defensive Player of the Year, and the man nicknamed the Judge, while referring to himself as a Jedi Knight, took over the league. So with Lester and Hendricks anchoring the defense and Plunkett and the still productive 32-year-old Cliff Branch manning the offense, the Raiders snuck into the playoffs at 11-5, but were thought of as a whole tier behind the Chargers and Patriots, who now had good teams. Regardless, though, they couldn't worry about that problem yet, as the Raiders had to face none other than the Oilers in the wild card, and Ken Stabler wanted revenge. He did not get revenge. Although Houston was slightly favored, Ken Stabler was harassed all day long, getting sacked 7 times, with rookie linebacker Matt Millen and the rest of the team making life hell for him. And although the game was close for most of it, the Raiders blew everything open in the 4th, and from there it wasn't close. And none other than Lester Hayes got a pick 6 in the final couple plays, and he finished the game with 2 sacks, 2 picks, and a touchdown as they won 27-7. But man, I just gotta mention, it's always an experience watching these old games, and just tuning into this one, I was not ready for right away. Earl Campbell fumbled the opening carry, and the Oilers' return man was no shot. Football, ladies and gentlemen, football is going down. So yeah, you know, casually one of the greatest single game performances by a corner ever led to round 2, an absolutely terrifying matchup with the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns were good. They were better than the Oilers, and also better than the Raiders probably. Once again in the divisional round, the Raiders faced another random-ass MVP season, this time from another one-time Pro Bowl quarterback in Brian Sipe. But this game was so scary because the weather was an abysmal negative 37-degree wind chill, and it was 1 degree outside with absolutely ferocious winds. This was at the time the second coldest game ever, and it was ugly as hell, which also meant it was another iconic game. Brian Sipe, like Stabler, just could not break through this Raiders defense. Hendricks and Heyy took over the game as Lester had 2 picks again, but the Raiders offense couldn't get anything going and gave the Browns their only touchdown of the game on a pick 6 themselves. But eventually, it got to the 4th quarter and Mark Van Eegen took a 14-12 lead for the Raiders. Now they just needed to hold on. But things looked pretty fucking bad. The Browns finally got something going, and with a minute remaining, they drove down the field, needing just a field goal to win the game, but they were absolutely not going to go for the kick, because the conditions were so bad, the Browns didn't feel they had a chance, from even just 30 yards out, as they had already missed 3 kicks so far, and then it happened. The play known as Red Right 88 occurred, as even though the Browns coaching staff told Brian to, quote, throw it into Lake Erie if anyone wasn't open, Brian did not get the memo and missed an open receiver himself and threw a pick to Raiders safety Mike Davis, who would end the game. And the Raiders somehow, someway, advanced to the AFC Championship. It would have been really fun to see that game live, but the Raiders advanced to the AFC Championship again and faced the San Diego Chargers, who were probably the best team in the league still, like I said, but they were beatable. I mean, even just a few weeks before this game, the Raiders hung 40 on them before, so they knew they had it, or at least they could have. And right away in this game, you'll never guess who the difference maker was.
Intercepted, and you know who. All the way to the 25-yard line goes Lester Heyy.
This is just fucking ridiculous. Look at this graph. Look at this. He did get the record for most picks in a year. And when you count picks that also got called back, by this point, he had 22 interceptions in a season, in a slower era too. I mean, this is just historic stuff, and it will never be replicated again. But while Fouts and the Chargers offense was better and had one of the best offensive cores of all time, the Raiders were better for this one game, which is nuts. They forced 3 turnovers, turned the ball over 0 times, and Jim Plunkett played the best game of his entire career. Despite being sacked 6 times, he finished with 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a near-perfect passer rating of 155.8 as the Raiders shut out Fouts and the Chargers in the 4th quarter with a 7-minute drive to hold off a comeback after being up 28-7. And they've done it again. It's time for another Super Bowl, and this one had beef. Remember earlier this year when Al Davis put up a big middle finger to the commish Pete Rozelle and the rest of the league that made it feel even more than ever that the Raiders were the outlaws of the NFL? And now, the Raiders would be in the Super Bowl meeting the Philadelphia Eagles and were the underdogs for their 4th straight playoff game, trying to become the first team to ever win the Super Bowl as a wildcard team. And much like the Vikings game, this Super Bowl was an absolute embarrassment. And the villains, they won again. From the second this game started, it was clear one team was here to win and dominate, while the other was just here. On the first possession, Eagles quarterback Ron Jaworski threw a pick, and the Raiders proceeded to find Cliff Branch for a touchdown, and Jaworski couldn't get anything going. As to end the quarter on a crucial 3rd and 4, versus the best defense in football, Plunkett rolled and found Kenny King, who they got from the Jack Tatum trade, and he would run 80 yards for the touchdown. And once again, I'm sorry, but these old NFL broadcasts are just, there's too much going on sometimes. Like, what are we doing here, dog? You're doing too much. But it was cool to see Lester Heyy just absolutely blathering up like prime Yogi Bear. But the point is, the Eagles got smashed, and a little-known linebacker that would become a future All-Pro by the name of Rod Martin had an incredible 3-pick game with Lester Hayes finally not getting any, as Plunkett had a 100 higher passer rating than Ron Jaworski did. I mean, the only thing Philly had going for them was their uniforms, and the Raiders did the impossible. They won the Super Bowl. Jim Plunkett won the Super Bowl MVP, becoming the first minority to do so, and Al Davis had another piece of hardware that he got to pluck away from his enemy in Pete Rozelle. As they were getting the trophy, Al Davis thought about pranking the commissioner, apparently, by fake kidnapping him with his players, but that might have gone wrong, so instead, he just gave his speech, similar to Winston Churchill's famous speech from back in the day, telling Raider Nation this was our finest hour, and that the players and coaches truly brought the Raiders back for good.
In the early 60s, I would think in terms of national, but now I'm thinking in terms of global. Which team, by colors alone, is identifiable around the world? Which team, by slogan, commitment to excellence, just win, baby, all those things are the Raiders.
The Raiders were now global. They had won 2 Super Bowls in 5 years, and every single player on this team embraced this identity of feeling like the entire league was against them, because it was. The whole league hated the Raiders, and especially the owners. And Al Davis this season became already the most, or he probably was already the most hated man in the league, because the legal battles with Pete Rozelle specifically only intensified, which we'll get to in a minute, because free agency still wasn't really a thing yet, and the Raiders ended up having pretty much the same exact team, but they aged 20 years in one offseason. Who knows what they were doing off the field to cause that? I don't particularly want to know, but injuries destroyed them this season as well. Plunkett, Reggie Kinlaw, a huge piece to the defense who played defensive tackle, missed the whole season. Mark Van Egan and others really hurt in their losses. But the biggest issue was still their amazing division, as this year, the Raiders went 0-6 versus the Broncos, Chargers, and Chiefs, with the loss that ended their season being a 21-55 shellacking at the hands of the Chargers. And Seattle was still here too, but they weren't as big of a threat. It also didn't help that with Plunkett out, Mark Wilson, the Raiders' first-round pick in 1980, who Al Davis thought would come in and be the future, came in and threw 19 picks in 9 starts. Fucking fantastic. Clap it up for the boy. That's the franchise player right there. But when I wrote this part of the script, I wanted to just throw up, and I wasn't even close to being alive for this, but the Raiders in 1981 also had one of the worst starts to the year for any defending champion ever, as through week 6, the Raiders had suffered 3 straight shutout losses. 3 games in a row without scoring a single point as reigning Super Bowl champions. And while all that mess was happening, Al Davis was prepared to challenge Pete Rozelle to a boxing match, where the winner got all the power and the rights to a free nut shot whenever they pleased. Because after Davis really tried to get a new stadium from Oakland, the city told him, no, you're not getting any improvements. Why would we do that? The 3.2 trillion seagulls that just get summoned out of thin air midway through the third quarter is part of the ambiance. And so Davis sued the NFL to move the team to Los Angeles. Because remember, the NFL said, hey, please don't do that. But he did it anyways. And when this went to court, the jury sided with Al Davis, believe it or not. And from here on out, the Oakland Raiders became the Los Angeles Raiders, and surely this team will never move again. So yeah, the LA Raiders were born, and we've gone over this before, but that feeling of betrayal of having your team taken from you does not feel very good, and it's gonna happen again 2 more times, but over and over again, it was like the Raiders really didn't want to move. It was just they had no other choice in every single scenario. Lack of improvements and be it political problems, kept making these moves happen, and once again, as you know, it's going to happen at least 2 more times. Hopefully not a third in the future from here in the present day. So the Raiders were in an unprecedented situation. They were in a new city, but with other teams that move cities usually, they try to embrace that city's new culture. But however, the Raiders are kind of the exception, and instead, the city of Los Angeles and the Raiders culture would be fused together, and a few new faces that would define the next decade of Raiders football would be instrumental in that. When you take 2 Hall of Famers in back-to-back draft classes, that usually means you're going to be successful for a while, and that's what the Raiders did. Like I said, in '81, they got a star in the second round in defensive end Howie Long. Now, he looks like he's about to lowball you an offer for a forklift, but he was a demonic creature on the field. And then the offensive firepower came in 1982 when their first pick as the Los Angeles Raiders, the Silver and Black, took running back Marcus Allen, 10th overall. And obviously both these guys were immeasurably impactful and will just be some of the best players that the Raiders in their franchise history will ever field. But I would argue that there is another guy who came in this year and wasn't as good as both of those guys at their peak, but he defined everything that it meant to be a Raider, once again, for good and for bad. And that guy I've actually talked about already, just for another team. His name is Lyle Alzado. Lyle Alzado in the past was an All-Pro with the Browns and Broncos, and shockingly, the Raiders brought him in even though he had a bit of an attitude problem. Can you believe that? Crazy, right? But once upon a time, we could actually manage that in people. But no, seriously, his attitude was a real problem, and he was known to switch moods randomly and intensely, and although at the time people said it was just who he was, after his retirement, Lyle said his rampant steroid use was to blame. But in the moment, it was fair to just be like, yeah, this dude was insane. I mean, this man boxed Muhammad Ali. He was the perfect Raider. But 1982 was just a weird season for everyone. Not only because the Raiders had a new core mixed with the old one, but they were also in LA now, and the strike happened this year, which really fucked the Raiders over, because this team ended up going 8-1, but because only 9 games were played, the NFL decided to allow 16 teams into the playoffs for a one-time Super Bowl tournament, which meant the 8-1 Raiders played the 4-5 Cleveland Browns in the wild card. Now, they blew them out, but what made this team so good? Well, it was the same guys on defense. Matt Millen and Rod Martin provided steady linebacker play, while Lester Hayes made a Pro Bowl, Lyle Alzado won Comeback Player of the Year, and Ted Hendricks, the mad stork at the age of 35, made an All-Pro team and came second in Defensive Player of the Year. Actually crazy, but the offense was carried by one of the best rookie running back seasons ever that still could have been so much more. Marcus Allen, as we'll go over, has probably the most complicated legacy any Raider currently has, but in the limited games he played in this season, he had 700 rushing yards and 400 receiving yards, and his game log is just wild. So in his first 5 games, he had rushing totals of 116, 56, 87, 0, and 156. But even in that weird 8 carry for 0 yards game, he had 6 catches for 54 yards, and later on versus Denver, he had another mediocre 12 carry for 16 yard game, but went for near 100 yards through the air and 2 receiving touchdowns. So he was a hybrid back, an amazing runner and a receiving back, as in his rookie season, he finished 3rd in MVP voting to Dan Fouts and Mark Mosley, a kicker. So, you know, very normal stuff all around, as Marcus Allen finished the season with the same amount of total touchdowns as Jim Plunkett did. But yeah, the Raiders kicked the saliva out of the Browns and moved on to face the New York Jets, who, by DVOA metrics, were the best team in football this year. They had the sack exchange at this point in time and the league's top rusher in Freeman McNeil, so they really were the best team in football. That would be when quarterback Richard Todd decided to throw the ball forward, which, to be fair, was rare, and the Raiders still had every chance to win this game, but I mean, just holy fucking choke off, man. This is what I find so fascinating about sports in general and football specifically. You could go back in time to any point, and some specific teams have this identity to them, and the Raiders and Jets are 2 of those teams. And even though this game happened like almost 40 years ago, I mean, I don't know what else to say. This is just an average Raiders vs. Jets game. Nothing more. So all year, and honestly still for most of his career, Jim Plunkett was a turnover-prone quarterback, and early on in this game, he was struggling mightily. And to make things even better, so was the Raiders' defense. For reasons that only prime Bob Sutton could explain, the Raiders left their second-year corner, Ted Watts, in his first full season starting, to be guarding All-Pro wide receiver Wesley Walker, who incinerated him for 170 yards. But eventually, the Raiders fought back into this game, even taking the lead at one point, but eventually losing it and being down 14-17, Jim Plunkett had a chance to play the hero. Well, that'll do it. All hope was gone, but come on now, this is the New York fucking Jets, baby, so of course we still got ourselves a football game as McNeil fumbled on a play that should have never happened. This should have been a kneel down 100% of the time, but the caveman didn't have that technology back then, so go do it to him, boys. Come on, Jim, let's go down the field and ice this game. Shit. See what I'm talking about? Like, this is objectively funny. This was just an ugly weather game, and maybe in a more normal division playoff circumstance, the Raiders could have done something, but not this season. Now, the only thing I forgot to mention was, you know, a small inconsequential moment where Lyle Alzado ripped off a man's helmet, and after threatening to kill someone in the Jets, full force chucked the helmet at another dude, which led to a rule being created where a player cannot use a helmet as a weapon. You just gotta love that, man. I mean, that's one of those rules that when you see it in the rule book, you're probably like, oh, I wonder how that oh, Raiders. Definitely the Raiders. Because, like, how does that even happen? But anyways, the Raiders moved into 1983, and Al Davis was quoted as saying that he smelled a dynasty brewing. And the main reason for that was a scheme, a devious plot to get the Raiders a Hall of Fame quarterback, except Pete Rozelle was having absolutely none of that. Prior to the 1983 NFL Draft, the Los Angeles Raiders offered a ridiculous haul of picks, including 3 firsts, 2 seconds, and more, including most likely future Hall of Famer Howie Long, to the Baltimore Colts for the right to the 1st overall pick. And this just so happened to be a generational draft with a generational quarterback prospect available on the board. The trade was a done deal. This was by far the best package the Colts could receive, and it didn't go through for reasons that have never been fully explained. The commish Pete Rozelle straight up vetoed the trade for John Elway to become a Raider, something that Al Davis and Ron Wolf could never get over, and most Raider fans feel the same. Because, come on now, this wasn't done for any football reasons. Pete Rozelle just wanted to hit Al Davis with one last fuck you for ignoring him and moving to LA anyways. And even I'm tired, man. What I'm trying to say is Elway ended up in Denver, the Raiders division rival, for a far less package, and he will be back. But besides that, the Raiders took nose tackle Bill Pickel, who will become a massive piece in a few years, and blossom into an all-pro, and was honestly one of the most underrated players of the 80s, as in 3 of his first 4 seasons in the NFL, the dude had 11 plus sacks, once again as a defensive tackle. But the 83 season started off on a goofy note, and nobody really had any idea if the Raiders were a bottom 10 team or the greatest team of all time. This team was still quarterbacked by Jim Plunkett, who was older now at 36, so their expectations weren't sky high, and nobody knew what to think after the strike. But the Raiders started off the season 4-0, but then things got tough because in week 5, they had a heavily anticipated matchup with the best team in football, as the MVP Joe Theismann and the Hogs came to town. The Skins were fresh off a chip in '82, led by the most underrated human in NFL history in Joe Gibbs as head coach, and the offense was loaded with John Riggins, Art Monk, and a ridiculous O-line alongside a Hall of Fame-led defense. So if the Raiders could win this game, they would be for real. No debate whatsoever, but they fell just short. They fell behind early 20-7, but came back because that's actually a trait that we used to have. We lost now, but once upon a time we could come back. And we ended up losing on a game-winning Joe Theismann drive, but Plunkett played well. The defense just needed to do better containing the Skins' pass attack, but the Raiders had a new weapon themselves to work with, as tight end Todd Christensen emerged as a top 3-1 tight end in the NFL. So Christensen's emergence was huge for Plunkett, as he finished the year with 1,247 yards and led the entire league in receptions with 92. And with Cliff Branch at the age of 35, this breakout season was needed. But after the Skins loss, they suffered 2 more losses in 3 weeks to the division rival Seahawks, and narrowly avoided another loss in a thriller on Sunday Night Football to Dallas. And many thought that, yes, while the Raiders were good, teams like Seattle might have had a higher chance to straight up win the Super Bowl than the Raiders. But the Raiders rebounded from there. Despite Marcus Allen leading the league in fumbles, which surely won't be a problem in the future and definitely won't end this franchise's winning culture forever in a few seasons, But they finished the season winning 6 of their last 7, and by year's end, although the defense wasn't actually elite, it seemed like they were just primed to put it all together eventually. I mean, this defense was mean. Howie Long, Hall of Fame, and All-Pro defensive end. Reggie Kinlaw, Lyle Alzado, and Ted Hendricks were the front 4. Absolutely vile. Then, Matt Millen and Rod Martin were in the middle, with Lester Hayes, Mike Davis, and Pro Bowl safety Van McElroy. And this defense also really went up another level when they traded for Hall of Fame corner Mike Haynes near the end of the season. I mean, does that defense sound like one that isn't top 10 to you? Come on. But the reason people didn't believe in them was by this point the Raiders' stars and experience of the past had faded away, so there was still doubt that they could get over the hump with this somewhat newer core. Not that everyone was completely gone, but Raiders staples like Art Shell and Gene Upshaw weren't here anymore. Well, except they sort of were, and this is what the Raiders and Al Davis also do very, very, very well. There's always a sense of family with former players. If you go there as a Warrior, you will be a Raider for life, and Al will give you what you need if you show him respect and love. And Gene Upshaw remained a prominent voice even in retirement for the Raiders, while Art Shell joined the coaching staff to continue being with the Silver and Black. So this team had all the potential to be terrifying. I don't care who you are. Having to deal with the best tight end in football, Marcus Allen, and a Super Bowl MVP on one side, and a defense with at least 4 Hall of Fame caliber guys on it, I mean, they were scary. And as winners of the AFC West at 12-4, and with Miami knocked out, the Raiders had home field advantage throughout the AFC, if they so chose to take that route, and they did. In the divisional round, I wish we could have gotten another legendary game from this rivalry, but no, the Raiders just steamrolled this once great beast and discarded them like roadkill, as they won 38-10 over the Steelers, and for what it's worth, the game ended right away with another Lester Hayes pick 6. But this was the big game. Seattle. The team that beat them twice in the regular season. They upset the Dolphins and made it to the AFC Championship. With Dave Craig and Steve Largent, they were a dangerous offense, but this game was another massacre. Dave Craig had a horrific time being alive. But this, as a whole, was one of the greatest AFC Championship defensive performances ever. Craig went 3 for 9. I repeat, 3 for 9. 3 completions in the AFC Championship game. Christ. 12 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 picks, with a first quarter pick to Lester Hayes again, ending the game right away. So before fans could even down their second beer, the Raiders forced 5 turnovers and were up 27-0, and they were doing it again. I'm gonna just take my time every single time I can say it, okay? But the Los Angeles Raiders were in the Super Bowl. Also, for those of you that think that I'm wearing a Davante Adams jersey, because hold on, you peeping the 17, right? This isn't Davante Adams, but I'll reveal who it is later. Beautiful words, like a true poet. But the Raiders matchup would be their hardest Super Bowl opponent ever. Theismann and the Skins awaited again. And although the Raiders had a more dominant postseason run, Washington was the better team and the favorites to win it. The Skins averaged far and away the most points per game this season at 33.8. Nobody wanted the smoke from them, but they didn't care. They were giving it to you anyways. Except Washington did not account for 2 things. And those 2 things were pretty damn important. The Raiders' new and improved defense and Marcus Allen. By this point, Marcus Allen was having one of the greatest playoff runs of all time. In both playoff games, he averaged 187 total yards in 2 games on just 19 carries, with 6 receptions and 1.5 touchdowns a game. But could he keep it going for 1 more performance? Well, yes. Yes, he could.
Putting back upfield, and Marcus Allen could be gone.
Marcus Allen pulled off one of the most iconic runs in NFL history. On a broken play, he turned around and ran 74 yards for a touchdown. And this play put the Raiders up by 26 points. They were blowing out their 3rd straight team in the playoffs. One of the best offenses of all time was held to 9 total points on the game. It was an absolute masterclass of a performance by the defense. Theismann had 2 picks, 1 fumble, and was sacked 6 times, including the biggest play of the game, which was a 5-yard pick six after the Raiders got pressure on Joe. Howie Long, Lyle Alzado, Mike Haynes, Lester Hayes. There were just too many monsters on this team, and Marcus Allen had 191 rushing yards alone and 2 touchdowns, as Allen won the Super Bowl MVP and capped off one of the greatest postseason runs by any player ever, as the Raiders won their 3rd Super Bowl in franchise history in a blowout 38-9 game, and Al Davis and Raider fans could not be happier. I mean, this is just one of those moments that it makes you proud to be a Raider fan. The NFL did everything it could to hold back Al, to stop him from getting what he wanted, to stop him from getting Elway, but he didn't care. He took what he wanted anyways. So when Rozelle was forced to hand Al Davis and the Los Angeles Raiders the Super Bowl trophy, he didn't give a long speech about how much he hated the league, and instead, Al Davis, the man who created the Raiders' image, the Raiders' culture, and was a pioneer in everything having to do with equality and winning in sports, was still a man of respect above all. And when you have great coaches, you have great players. And when you have great players, you have a great organization. And you tell them one thing.
Just win, baby.
What a beautiful video this is so far, huh? Are we all having fun? This is all just amazing. It's winning, it's success, and nothing more. However, as you probably know, the Raiders have never won another Super Bowl since this win. And it's going to take some time for it to get really miserable, but I guess technically speaking, it is all downhill from here. So if you just watch this video for the pain, it's gonna start. It's gonna start now. However, before we dive into all that is coming, the cultural impact of the Raiders for the time they were in Los Angeles cannot be breezed by. The Raiders became synonymous with LA culture and evidently hip-hop culture. It was once said that the Raiders just defined what the streets were, and the streets were hip-hop at the time, and that only grew when NWA repped all-black Raiders gear, and it was just brilliant. Al Davis was just so ahead of his time, and the rest of sports in general, in terms of a brand. The Raiders brand itself had gone beyond just being known as the Rebels of the NFL, and wearing Raiders gear became a symbol of going against all those who were in power and abusing it. And the Raiders brand just continued to flourish and took over not only just like the West Coast, but the entire world. By 1990, Raiders gear accounted for about 18% of all NFL apparel sales. Everyone in LA was wearing Raiders stuff. A fair amount of people weren't even Raiders fans that were wearing it, because it was a fashion, political, and football statement all at the same time, which is something still to this day I'd argue no NFL or let alone sports team will ever come close to matching ever again. And people felt a connection with the Raiders as a whole, and I do too. And to explain it best, I feel like this Lyle Alzado interview sums up everything it means to be associated with the Raiders as a brand.
Can portray me any way they want because I don't give a damn. I am what I am, and until those people touch me close enough, they'll never know what I am. If they want to see me in this interview or in a newspaper article and say, what's the matter with this guy? Let them say it. But don't you analyze me, and don't you tell me what I am until you get close enough to understand what I am. Then you can make an analysis of me. But don't you dare do it until then.
This team's image was perfect and one of a kind. They wanted to fight everyone. Half their players were missing teeth, and the other half had a bloodlust. And best of all, they were good. They were really, really good. Even though they were like the exact polar opposite of what teams like the Cowboys and 49ers represented, they won just as much, if not more. And people were attracted to that style of play. They just had to keep it up. And with Jim Plunkett now more of a spirit animal to the team than a player, it was time for Al Davis's pet project to emerge from his test tube and take over. And the Mark Wilson era began. It was over. Well, it was a good run. Randomly in week 8, he had 5 touchdowns, but 2 weeks later, he logged an impressive passer rating of 8.6. And it was clear that he was not the guy. And He did not, in fact, have the superstar potential Al Davis saw in him, but this team was still good and fun. They started out 4-0 again and played the most violent game possibly ever versus the Bears, and all of their quarterbacks got injured, and one of the funnest games of the season versus Miami, and being the second team to beat them all year as they dropped 45 on Miami's heads, and Marcus Allen had a 52-yarder to seal it. Also, though, Dave Casper was back in the team. Kind of random, but he caught 4 passes all year long, so that's a thing. Now, when you think about 1980s defenses, what's the first one that comes to mind? Obviously, the 1989 Nashville Nightmares. They had a hell of a squad, but the 85 Bears are probably who you think of. However, the 84 Raiders deserve some love, okay? Howie Long, All-Pro. Rod Martin, All-Pro. And the secondary was still led by Lester Hayes, McElroy, and Mike Haynes, while Bill Pickell and Lyle Alzado combined for near 20 sacks. And the entire team, still to this day, has the most punts forced in an entire season ever, as this team averaged 7.31 punts forced per game by opponents, and 117 punts total on the season. For example, last year, Cleveland led the league in punts with 89, which doesn't even sniff the Raiders' record on defense. But the defense still did miss the leadership of Ted Hendricks, as one of the greatest Raiders of all time retired after the Super Bowl win in '83, but this was the beginning of a new darkness despite the current light, as in the final game of the season, the Raiders had an all-important game versus none other than the Pittsburgh Steelers to see if the Raiders could get home field advantage in the playoffs. What do you think happened, huh? Of course, Mark motherfucking Wilson shat himself. 5 for 13, 45 yards, and a pick was not enough to win the game. And the Steelers, led by whoever the hell Walter Abercrombie is, won the game. Which meant, in the wild card, they had to face the Seahawks on the road, and it went even worse. That poor Raiders defense tried their best. Dave Craig only had 4 completions, but with Mark Wilson now on the bench with a thumb injury that he was battling for most of the season, and he was just bad, Jim Plunkett could not step up in his last meaningful game as a Raider, as Los Angeles' offense could only cross the 50-yard line 3 separate times, as they failed, 7-13, and the darkness encapsulated them. Well, dang nabbit, shiver me timbers, the Raiders were not doing very well, but we still had some shining stars. On offense, we had Todd Christensen, and Marcus Allen specifically in 1985 had an unbelievable season. He just set fire to the houses of peasants worldwide. He was special. We know this, but the league just hadn't seen a superstar like him at his position be able to do what he did. He finished the season #1 in rushing yards with 1,759, but he only went over 150 on the ground twice because he had so many catches. He had 555 receiving yards and was basically on the field for every play. As with Marcus Allen doing his thing, he won the MVP and Offensive Player of the Year, while the Raiders defense continued to be great. Man, I wish that was something I could actually still say, but I can't. If only we still had TJ Carey nowadays, our defense would be totally fine. Then more heartbreak, and Al Davis realized the Raiders had a massive issue, which was very, very difficult to solve, especially in the pre-salary cap era. They didn't have a good quarterback. What a problem. As in their first playoff game versus the Patriots, despite grabbing the #1 seed, they lost to New England. Why? Because Mark Wilson had less throwing talent in his entire body than a fucking lobster. I'm not even listing his stats off. I'm pissed. But they lost to Tony Eason. To be fair, I guess nobody was going to beat Chicago this season probably, and so the Raiders were really in a bit of a pickle. They had no quarterback, but they did have a good team outside of that. The 1986 draft, though, wasn't really giving the Raiders much to work with, as the best quarterback available from this class turned out to be Mark Rippon. And so the Raiders rolled into the 86 season with Mark bitch-ass Wilson and Jim Plunkett at 40. I mean, that just sucks for all other Raider players. Imagine being Howie Long, doing everything you can, leading a defense that recently forced the most punts ever, only for Mark Wilson to jog out there and stick his forearm in his rectum for 59 minutes a game. But I think I'm giving too much credit here. You'd probably be more entertained watching him stick his hand in his ass than watching the 86 Raiders, because they weren't bad, but that was kind of the problem. Marcus Allen battled injuries and didn't repeat another dominant year. Jim Plunkett suffered from injuries and retired after the season, and the team was actually good heading into week 13? Okay, well, never mind all that then. I'll just shut my fat ass up and let the Raiders do the talking for me, because we just pulled off a nice overtime win versus the Chargers, and this game versus Philadelphia was about to be a make or break game for the season, and maybe even larger for this entire franchise. This was it. This is the play. Remember how I said earlier how Marcus Allen was probably the most polarizing Raider ever? Well, up to this point, it had been all sunshine and rainbows, but now that sunshine was turning to pitch black depression, and those rainbows had become monochromatic. I mean, this was it. They had the game won, but to be honest, Marcus Allen had always struggled with fumbles, but this one was unforgivable. As from there, the Raiders lost every game remaining on their lowly schedule, and they missed the playoffs despite being 8-4. Now, I know I said the season wasn't fun, but objectively it was kinda hilarious. I mean, they had another helmet fight incident versus the Chiefs for valid reasons, honestly. Fuck the Chiefs, I feel that. And then during that losing streak, following the Philly game, they lost to the Chiefs while losing the turnover battle 0-7. They had 7 turnovers, and KC had 0. And they ended their year off losing to the Colts, who at one point were 0-13. All right, I'm done. Okay, I'll take a chill pill because I like this team. I don't need to dunk on them too much, but they make it easy. And we were now getting into the 87 season, which was a strike-shortened year, so it was just weird for everyone. But also there were reports coming out that Tom Flores might have been losing the locker room just a bit, and this isn't a knock on his coaching at all. Obviously, Hall of Fame coach. Amazing stuff, but he had a really tough situation to deal with, and Marcus Allen was not making that easier. In regards to this upcoming Marcus Allen feud with Al Davis, spoiler alert, I'll do my best to remain unbiased and feel free to choose whatever side you feel is more correct to you, because both sides are obviously flawed. But this season, the Raiders team went on strike, and a majority of them returned to replace the backups after a few weeks, but Marcus Allen did not, and this rubbed players like Howie Long the wrong way. However, with Marcus joining the team later, still dealing with lingering injuries, Al Davis decided to unleash a literal demigod. And now it's time to talk about arguably the greatest athlete to ever play any sport. His legends are iconic. The myths surrounding him are ridiculous, and maybe some of it's true, and he is so iconic, I don't even need to say the dude's last name. All I have to say is Bo.
Is it true you ran a 4.12?
Do you believe it?
4.13. And thus, the legend of Bo Jackson was born. Now, Bo Jackson, in all honesty, never should have been a Raider. He should have been a Buccaneer. But even though Tampa took him first overall in '86, the Bucs allegedly sort of tried to pull him away from playing baseball and asked him to focus on football full time. And so, when the Raiders in '87 said, hey, you can do both, just show up on Sunday and ball out. And when they gave him that option, he took it, and Bo Jackson became a Raider. But he didn't join the team until week 8 most years, and after a 100-yard, 2-touchdown performance with 5 receptions in week 12, the following week was where something truly special would take place. 3rd down and 6 on their own 9. And when you have a player like Bo Jackson, you do everything you can to get him in space. And the Raiders would invent plays for Bo Jackson, basically. And on this particular play on Monday Night Football, Bo Jackson ran so fast, nobody even had a chance to catch him. And he ran 91 yards for a touchdown. 1 of 2 on that day, with the other running over linebacker Brian Bosworth. But the '87 Raiders were not good regardless. They went 5-10, and they had an issue. Tom Flores retired, maybe partially because he didn't want to have to navigate the storm, nay, the decadal hurricane that was about to come between Al Davis and Marcus Allen, but I do get it from Marcus's perspective. Yes, his play had fallen off, but by this point, you could chalk it up to injuries, and it's not his fault the Raiders just brought in some amalgamation of a human created from the DNA of Gale Sayers' ball hair. And the unrest for Marcus also came from the fact that his role was flip-flopping, because to start the season in 1988, he was set up to be the guy, but only until Bo Jackson's baseball season ended. And by week 8, Bo would join the team, and Al Davis made it clear Bo was going to be the lead ball handler, eventually calling Marcus Allen a cancer to the team. So this was only one of the reasons why this was the beginning of the worst time to be a Raiders fan. Not only were two of probably the 10 most legendary figures in Raiders history at the time, two guys who both contributed heavily to a Super Bowl, and without one of them, it wouldn't have happened, were now at odds. But also the Raiders almost all of a sudden moved to Irwindale, which was kind of insane. They put down a $10 million deposit, but nothing came of that. And the biggest mistake the Raiders made was in the wake of Tom Flores leaving, as the Raiders brought in Mike Shanahan to coach the team, and it did not go well. Yeah, let's have a memorial for a second, okay? It was a damn good video to this point. It really was, but this is it. Fucking 40 years ago to this moment was when the Raiders organization stopped being a real threat, outside of 1 or 2 years, which we'll get to, but man, Al Davis and the Raiders are going to miss on a bunch of coaches in the future, but Mike Shanahan was just never going to work here for pretty much the exact same reasons why Josh McDaniels, I'm not ready to get into that yet, but the dude liked to control things, okay? Mike Shanahan was not going to adhere to the Raiders culture in the way that Flores and Madden did. He wanted things done his way. He wanted his coaching staff, and after trying to fire a lot of the Raiders' current staff, Al Davis brought him back because he said, I mean, they're family, they're staying, and that just did not sit well with the players and Davis, and very early on, it was clear that this was not going to work out. So once again, all of this started with Marcus Allen's fumble versus Philly, and by now the boulder was rolling down the hill, and the only thing left to do was watch it crush every sign of life in sight, and truly end this dominant stretch of near 25 years of amazing play from the Raiders. And year number 1 under Mike Shanahan wasn't as bad as other years will be, at least, but it was the same issues as before, but now they were a bit exaggerated. The defense was getting older, Lester Hayes was gone, Mike Haynes was 35, but still, they didn't have a quarterback, and Marcus Allen and Bo Jackson were still competing for time, but the best thing that happened in the Shanahan era by far was the drafting of wide receiver Tim Brown, who didn't play much very early in his career, and he got injured as well, but he would quickly evolve into arguably the most underrated wide receiver of all time. And so, year number 1 under Shanahan was in the books, with a 7-9 record, but at least they went 6-2 division, but not much else was positive. I mean, it was clear that Mike Shanahan and the Raiders were never going to work out together, and a tumultuous offseason only accelerated the inevitable breakup, as prior to the '89 season, Raiders safety Stacy Torren died in a tragic car crash, and Mike Shanahan ended up ordering the entire team to wear their uniform jerseys to the funeral because he thought some of the players didn't own suits. Yeah, not Raiders coach material, to be honest with you. And Al Davis admitted he made a mistake and made the hire he should have done long before the whole feud with Shanahan, but the two were now enemies. Shanahan did not appreciate Al Davis's meddling and the way he was treated as a whole, and Al Davis did not appreciate the way Mike treated people around him, but these two were never going to work out together. A power struggle was inevitable, and this relationship ended with Shanahan filing a dispute with the NFL office over an unpaid $250,000 with Al Davis, but nothing came of that, and on the way out the door, Shanahan said, if I ever get the chance to beat that man, I'm going to do it. And he ended up joining the quarterback who should have been the Raiders in Denver in John Elway. And eventually, a few Super Bowls came of that. And so the Raiders hired Art Shell, the Raiders legend who had always been with the Silver and Black since the moment he was drafted, and Art became the first black head coach ever. And this season, he was going to do everything he could to rebuild Raiders culture. He brought back that old school mentality, and it's always been a Raiders identity since Al Davis coached the team to want to run through a brick wall for your coach, and Art Shell did just that. The '89 Raiders went 7-5 after a 1-3 start. Bo Jackson joined the team late, but still almost had 1,000 rushing yards, and this was all despite a historic run from starting quarterback Jay Schroeder, as in 3 weeks, he averaged stats of 4 for 15 attempts, 58.3 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a pick, as well as a passer rating of 15.8. And Tim Brown unfortunately blew out his knee after 1 game this year, so the offense was poopy butthole because of that. But the defense remained pretty steady. Howie Long, Greg Townsend, but Also, they had a new guy in the secondary. There are some things that are a must for the Raiders, and one of those musts is when we're good, we always have a feared punisher in the secondary, ready to lay the boom on any dig route over the middle. And in 1989, the Raiders got another Jack Tatum archetype player in Eddie Anderson. Eddie Anderson was the perfect safety for the Raiders, and he wasn't a true superstar, but he was a hitter, and he famously would do a WWE 1-2-3 count on the ground after knocking a receiver out. And his first 2 games for the Seahawks in '87 immediately showed what type of player he was. He took off a Broncos player's helmet from a hit alone, and then the next week he hit Chiefs receiver Steve Watson so hard that he broke 3 of his ribs. So, hey, if you can do that to the Chiefs and Broncos, you'll be a good Raider. And he, along with other guys like All-Pro guard Steve Wisniewski, would set the tone for this next era of Raiders football. Sort of. It wasn't a good era, but the tone was set. Now, the 1990 season started off weird for the Raiders. Can you believe that? I've only said it like 35 times this video, and I'm gonna keep saying it, but I'm telling the truth again. Remember Lyle Alzado? Well, he's been retired for a fat minute, but at the age of 41, he decided to try and come back into the league. He didn't end up making the team, but sadly, later on, it became public that he had inoperable brain cancer, and not only did he admit to using steroids, but he said at least 75% of all players did as well, and the Raiders legend passed away in 1992 at just the age of 43. But the Raiders would go on to have their best season in a while, and for a while too, because in week 1 they set the tone with 2 defensive touchdowns, their only scores of the day in a win, and all year long, they rode 2 dudes every game. Pause. Marcus Allen and Bo Jackson. Mainly Bo still, because he was better than Marcus Allen, but this made Marcus pretty much the most overqualified backup running back ever. And in games like a must-win Monday Night Football matchup with Miami, both of their effectiveness was shown as they combined for about 180 yards in the ground in the win. Then, as it tended to go, Bo Jackson's stove turned on at about week 8, and it just kept getting hotter and hotter. He turned 13 carries into 117 yards versus the Broncos with an insane touchdown run, had a duel with Barry Sanders and the Lions, and by year's end, alongside Howie, Townsend, Eddie, and the defense being solid, the Raiders went 12-4 and were easily a top 3 to 5 team in football. All they needed to do was take care of business and not have any league-changing injuries take place, because wouldn't that just be a darn shame? Why can't we have nice things, man? Bo Jackson, sorry, I could do this. On a routine run. It was a hell of a play, but he was tackled a little awkwardly at the end, and he injured his hip, and although everything seemed fine, he got right back up, and people applauded him, but he tried to pop it back in place, but it was too late. After this hit, Bo Jackson never played in the NFL again, and this was it. This was the end of the greatest athlete the world may have ever seen. And so Bo Jackson retired, averaging 5.4 yards per carry, to this day, tied for the most yards per carry ever with Jamal Charles, and had the longest run out of any player in a single season each year of his career except for one, despite only playing half of the season because of baseball. And I don't know, even if he was a full-time player, I'm not sure he would have never gotten hurt, but if he didn't, who knows what would have happened. But I think he easily would have been a top 5 running back of all time. But the problem was, the Raiders won the game. They beat the Bengals anyways, and moved on to face the 15-time Super Bowl champion Ultra Dynasty Buffalo Bills, a team that hasn't choked once in their franchise's history, and the team itself said, well, this Bo Jackson injury really just took all the soul out of us, and they felt defeated before the game even began, and they were beaten down 51-3 in the AFC Championship game. Arguably the most lopsided blowout in the history of football in the playoffs, and don't worry, man. It's going to keep getting worse. Also, by this point, the Raiders began to expand their criminal reputation. In 1990, they drafted a man by the name of Anthony Smith, who missed his whole first season due to an injury, but he came back in 91 and played pretty well. He had double-digit sacks in his first 3 years as a Raider. It's just he's currently serving life in prison for murdering at least 4 people, allegedly. Fuck, bro. Fuck. At least they cleaned things up a bit by drafting quarterback Todd Marjanovic in 91 to be the franchise, and he never amounted to anything, but at least his issue was more goofy crimes, like Meth. Hey, though, at least this gives Marcus Allen the chance he's been waiting for. It's horrible that Bo Jackson's gone now, but Marcus Allen can be back, and he ripped his D apart on AstroTurf in a blowout loss to Houston because 1990s football. Well, damn, okay, and that only escalated things between Al Davis and Marcus Allen, as from there, Davis eventually accused Marcus Allen of exaggerating his injuries, and Marcus himself was not pleased to see Roger Craig, who's here now, taking away his carries even when he got healthy. But what's really funny from this season is, with Howie Long having a bit of a down year, the Raiders' best player was Ronnie Lott, who made an All-Pro team as a Raider at 32. The dude had 8 picks and led the NFL in interceptions. What the fuck? But this team somehow won 9 games. I don't have any explanation either. This team was scaring nobody on offense. Yes, the defense was really good, but their big 3 for scoring points was Jay Schroeder, Roger Craig, and Mervin Fernandez. Not a single skill position player went for over 700 yards this season. I mean, they had a game versus the Bengals where the team had 19 net passing yards. And they won, because the Bengals, led by fucking Donald Hollis and Mike Dingle, could not get it done. So they ended up making the playoffs, but shockingly, the offense held them back. And the Chiefs beat them 3 times in one season, ending their mediocre year in the first round. And then 92 started off horribly and finished with an ugly, ugly breakup. Before the year, the Raiders brought in Eric Dickerson and started giving second-round rookie running back Nick Bell some run, and Marcus Allen at 32, although yes, he slowed down significantly by this point, was buried as the team's third-string running back. So he and Al Davis were just furious at each other, and the fan base completely split on Marcus Allen, and for as long as Al Davis was a Raiders figure, Marcus Allen could not be with the silver and black, and by the end of the season, he left the team for none other than the Kansas City Chiefs, making yet another AFC West team that was now fueled by revenge. In this season, Eddie Anderson had the longest pick 6 in Raiders history, which was good. That was our only touchdown that game, and we lost because our offense was fucking terrible. It turns out, when your starting quarterback throws 11 touchdowns all year, you're not going to win very many games. Todd Marjanovic sucked. Jay Schroeder still blew balls. And this team had the worst offense in football, and it wasn't very close. The defense was good again. They had an emerging corner named Terry McDaniel now, but it wasn't enough, as the Raiders missed the playoffs, and now not only was Marcus Allen gone, but Bill King, the Raiders' iconic announcer, called it a career as well, as the voice of the Raiders would now be replaced. Well, this isn't very good, and still, ever since Jim Plunkett left, their number 1 goal was quarterback, quarterback, quarterback. And the Raiders did what you're supposed to do. They drafted a rookie in the 3rd round, and oh god, Billy Joe Hobart, and signed a veteran in the Haas, Jeff Hostetler, a quarterback who nobody really thought could be anything special, but he technically had Super Bowl DNA, and maybe he could be a serviceable veteran, and he was. The Raiders became the usual stingy team they were for most of their entire franchise's history. Good, threatening, played hard, fuck yeah. But luckily when the Haas came in, this unlocked Tim Brown, who had 1,000 yards for the first time in his career, and this would begin a long stretch of 1,000-yard seasons. But this season was in jeopardy. It needed saving, but Jeff Hostetler was ready to be a hero. At one point, the Raiders were 5-4 and battling to get to 500, but eventually, they got themselves in a win-and-get-in scenario versus the Denver Broncos in the final week of the season. And Denver was destroying them, honestly. John Elway and the Broncos took a 20-7 lead, and the Raiders looked dead, but damn it, Tim Brown is really, really good at football. Tim had 11 catches for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Jeff Hostetler did a great job matching John Elway, who was playing an elite game himself, and even channeled a little Ken Stabler himself, tying the game to force overtime. And in OT, the Raiders kicked a game-winning field goal to win it 33-30, which meant they got to face Denver in the playoffs in Los Angeles just 7 days later. And this one wasn't even close. Even after getting film on Jeff Hostetler, they couldn't stop the Haas. The career backup went for a 150 passer rating and 3 scores, and this ended a drought. This was a thing, okay? We hadn't won a playoff game since 1990, and that was considered a drought for us at this point. Holy fuck, I'm sad. And even more fittingly, in the last home playoff win in LA, one of our rookies, James Trapp, was inactive for this game, but ended up storming the field in street clothes and joined a massive brawl and was fined $7,500 for punching a Bronco. Ladies and gentlemen, the Raiders. And so the Raiders moved on to face the Buffalo Bills again, and once more, they were just out-talented. Hostetler played well, the run game led by Napoleon McCollum did a solid job, and the defense did aight too, but it wasn't enough, as the Raiders narrowly lost 23-29, as Buffalo would go on to face the Joe Montana, Marcus Allen-led Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. Oh, weird times, man. But the sentiment was clear. At this point, Jeff Hostetler was the best quarterback the Raiders have had since Jim Plunkett, and even way better than old Jim Plunkett too. And in this 0-degree weather game, basically, he played his ass off and looked like a very solid quarterback. And who knows if Howie Long didn't get like 4 offsides penalties, and if the Raiders also didn't lose Chester McLaughlin to injury, then they could have won this game as well. But then, after the loss, Howie Long decided to hang him up. He would easily make the Hall of Fame as one of the best players in not only Raiders history, but NFL history, and his loss would be felt very, very greatly. So entering 1994, the Raiders had a new plan. They were going to move back to Oakland? Once again, for kind of similar reasons, I guess, too. The stadium was just not it, and Oakland promised new renovations. So Al Davis said, all right, let's run it back. But they were close to actually moving to Hollywood Park instead, as a $200 million privately financed stadium was planned to be made where the former Hollywood Park racetrack was. And the league went so far as to guarantee 2 Super Bowls to be hosted there, with NFL owners letting this happen, agreeing on a 27-1 vote. But Al Davis ended up rejecting this because it meant he'd have to share a stadium with another LA team, and he ended up suing the NFL for not letting them play in Oakland in 94, with another lawsuit to come in 96. But then it came time to play football, and it was deja vu in all the worst possible ways, as another young running back suffered, once again, a career-ending injury. But this time, this one was somehow even worse, and a man almost died on the field on that very day. In Week 1 Monday Night Football, we got Raiders versus 49ers, and this rivalry I have opinions on, and it's kind of shocking I haven't even talked about it yet, but I said a little earlier, right, that these two teams represent so much about their geographical area, fan base, and on a greater level, it's somewhat of a political statement as well to choose the Niners or the Raiders. And if you're from the Bay, the Niners to this point had a history of winning and royalty. They had a dynasty with Montana and Walsh, and their glamorous, famous city reflected that as well. And even today, that remains strong, as I know I'm biased, okay, but all I'm going to say is that during the Super Bowl years, recently when the Niners were pretty good, I saw a lot of 49er flags on cars all of a sudden, and a fair amount of Niner fans I know have no idea who Jim Tomsula is. So there's differences, but both sides have evil and good, I guess. But I mean, to simplify things, because that was a lot of talking, the Raiders are pretty much just the polar opposite of the Niners, right? It's yin and yang. The Raiders are the outlaws, the villains of the league, hated by the NFL since day one, and Al Davis as well is also hated by the league. So there's just reasons that this team has the values they do, and they embrace the city's values as well. In Compton and in LA, they embraced their, whole violence thing, and in Oakland, it was a lot of the same. I mean, still to this day, this is a city that's been dealing with a lot of issues, and, for a city like that to have the Raiders to bring people together, I think is very important. And it's a shame that the city doesn't have them anymore, but if I were to go back and have to choose an NFL team to root for all over again, I choose the Raiders 10 times out of 10. I think this fan base and this team is truly one of a kind, if you haven't understood that from this video at this point. But the Niners rivalry has been sort of tame at this level. There was a controversy with the 49ers chop blocking Howie Long before, and in 91, when the Raiders beat the Niners, Charles Haley lost his mind in the locker room, punching holes in the wall, and even tried to fight Steve Young, and the 49ers were forced to call Ronnie Lott, who was on the Raiders at that point, to calm him down. But nothing super crazy has happened yet. But in this Week 1 game, the Raiders season ended, and the 49ers season was set on a Super Bowl winning path, when running back Napoleon McCollum had a career-ending hyperextended knee, and this injury would turn out to be life-threatening as he ruptured an artery as well. Do not look up the injury. It is one of the grossest injuries you'll ever see. Just a disgusting play, but it wasn't a dirty hit at all. It was just another very unfortunate end to a running back's career, and it was a miracle he didn't have to get his leg amputated. And in this game, Jerry Rice also broke the all-time career touchdown record, and the free fall for the Raiders would ensue. With another massive morale hit to the team, they fell to 2-4 and couldn't recover. Hostetler played fine, Tim Brown was amazing, but This was not a team that was good enough to do anything, and with a 9-7 record, they missed the playoffs. But in 1995, they moved back to Oakland. But one of the most important figures in Raiders history you've never heard of called it a career. The Water Boy. The Water Boy retired, and his name was Run Run Jones. And he was here since the very beginning. In '63, he was Al Davis's main guy for everything, and everyone had positive memories from him. Hell, even Mike Shanahan still loved the dude. Madden, Hendricks, all of these Raiders legends appreciated everything Run Run did. He lived at the facility, handled the game balls, gave towels, water, and he was the most constant presence for the Raiders throughout their history, even getting a ring for each of their 3 Super Bowl wins. And in return for his help, Al Davis showed Run Run loyalty, but after the move back to Oakland, Run Run hung him up as well. And so, after the year, the Raiders packed their bags and moved to Oakland, starting fresh, as Art Shell was no longer the Raiders head coach, and they promoted Mike White. What? He coached back then? Whatever, okay. He was the previous quarterback's coach, damn it. And in Oakland, right away, man, Raiders fans were not happy, especially with ticket prices, because they ended up increasing by 62.8% from the LA ticket prices, being on average $51 now. But they got even more pissed when in year number 1, the first year ever in Oakland, we had one of the worst collapses an NFL team has ever had. It was just injected into our bloodstream from day one. But this year we raced out to an 8-2 start to the season. We were really good. Once again, probably weren't going to win the Super Bowl or anything with Jeff Hostetler, but with Tim Brown, Wisniewski, and an above-average defense, we were a tough team to blow out. And the playoffs were a 99.9% certainty. But then, a week after his revenge game versus the Giants, Jeff Hostetler went down with a shoulder injury. And sadly, this basically ended his career as an above-average to average player. He missed 3 games, but then tried to rush back in a must-win game versus Seattle, but he wasn't ready at all. And the team lost that game 10-44. And we're in the midst of a 5-game losing streak, which meant they had one more chance to avoid a historic collapse to make the playoffs, and all they had to do was take down none other than Mike Shanahan and John Elway's Denver Broncos. And well, how'd the game go? I mean, all you need to know is that, actually, you know what? Let me just play Boomer's clip that he said to begin this game, because that's all you need to hear.
Well, they put their faith in Billy Joe Hobart.
They put their faith in Billy Joe Hobart. You heard that right. And despite taking an 11-point lead, despite the Broncos being without Terrell Davis and Shannon Sharp, the Raiders blew the lead. Running back Napoleon Kaufman had a big fumble, and Tim Brown did everything he could with 100+ yards and 2 touchdowns, like most games he played. But fucking John Elway, bro. Man, here we go. This was the play, right here. Massive 2-point conversion to tie the... Oh, hold on. Somebody threw an egg on the field. Stand by. All right, here we go. Massive 2-point conversion, and they got it. Fuck, they're choking, and the Raiders fumbled on their next drive, too. The Broncos go down the field after that. Game-winning kick by inches goes in, and that was it. 6 straight losses, and the Raiders missed the playoffs. Yeah, the dark times have arrived. All right, good year number 1 in Oaktown, boys. Hell of an effort, and yeah, things are about to start really sucking. For just a bit, though, but the rest of the 90s were horrid. There's no other way around it. 96 was summarized by another collapse and setting the record for the most penalties in a season at the time, because... Don't worry, we'll break that record again, and again, and again, but we missed the playoffs as a mid-team. And in 97, we had an odd season as well. We added former All-Pro safety Eric Turner, but also randomly logged one of the worst defensive seasons ever. They were last against the pass, and last against the run. I mean, it was insane. And we had, like, a good defense in 96, but I mean, come on, I have no idea how this happened. Surely it wasn't because our 2 starting corners were 32-year-old Terry McDaniel and 37-year-old Albert Lewis with 34-year-old Eddie Anderson back there as well. Like, why? And like, the funniest thing from this season was we wasted a really good season from journeyman quarterback and former first overall pick bust Jeff George. He was good. He was slinging the ball around, but we threw his season in the trash. And from there, he just bounced around the NFL and... well, it was never anything special. And so, we went 4-12 and completely bottomed out. This was our worst season under Al Davis ever, record-wise, and the worst since 1962. But the media thought it was over. With the salary cap in play now, it seemed as if the Al Davis way of doing things just might not work anymore. You can't just sign a big name but troubled guy because the media was bigger than ever before now, and taking the fastest people available just doesn't work anymore. But the first thing to do was hire a coach, and at least the Raiders had strong leadership to begin with, though. We had some things going for us. In 1997, Al Davis and the Raiders hired Amy Trask to be the first female CEO of an NFL team ever. But once again, Al Davis didn't care at all about her gender, and neither did Amy. Both people just wanted to go to work and build something great. But the two of them and the entire front office had a tough decision to make ahead of 1998, as they had to choose a head coach. And after conducting interviews, Al Davis asked Trask who impressed her most from interviews and who the Raiders should hire. And she said, "We should hire Bill Belichick." Now, obviously, the Raiders did not hire Bill Belichick, as he would go on to win 12 Super Bowls with the New York Jets and Mark Sanchez, but I'd argue that the Raiders actually made the correct decision here. Similar to Mike Shanahan, I'm not sure Belichick's controlling ways would have worked with a culture like the Raiders, and instead, Al Davis went with another guy. A younger coach with little experience, but a fiery passion for the game, who reminded him of John Madden in all the right ways. And that man was Jon Gruden, the youngest head coach in NFL history at the time. The Raiders did what we should have done in 2021 and pressed the restart button completely. We weren't good again in 98, but we were getting younger and collecting pieces. We brought in Super Bowl MVP Desmond Howard, who didn't do anything whatsoever, but he was fast. And we did this before too. A few seasons ago, we signed Cowboys Super Bowl MVP Larry Brown, who was now cut after starting one game. But yeah, whatever. There was a collapse again, but that's kind of par for the course at this point. But 1999 was the year everything changed for the better. We had two cornerstone pieces to work with now, including Gruden. And those guys were Charles Woodson, our 1998 first rounder, and an unlikely journeyman quarterback in Rich Gannon, who at the age of 34, had a breakout season and made a Pro Bowl. But it wasn't enough for now, as at 7-8 going into the final game of the season, Al Davis was already pretty unsatisfied. He didn't want to settle for a good rebuilding season. He wanted to make the playoffs and win a Super Bowl. And so this led to underratedly one of the most important games in Raiders history. It was the second day of the new millennium in Arrowhead Stadium, a revenge game for Rich Gannon, and a game the Raiders needed to win because Jon Gruden wanted to keep his job, because the players and fans loved him, but if Al wasn't seeing results, he was not going to hesitate to get rid of a guy regardless of the love. And for the Chiefs, after Seattle lost their game earlier, if they won, they would make the playoffs and get a home playoff game as well, and lose, and they would be out of the dance. And the game was a disaster. Just a disaster. 2 minutes in and the Raiders were down 14-0 with 0 offensive yards from the Chiefs. But damn it, man. Even when this team sucks, they always fight. We always battle. And our players usually suck, but they play their asses off. And we battled into this game as well, and late into the fourth quarter, it was 31-28 Chiefs. And then, I mean, come on, this was a pure effort run by Tyron Wheatley, who had a big year on the ground, but hope still seemed lost. After a Chiefs score, they were down by 3, but they converted a 4th and 13 and forced overtime with a field goal. So now overtime was here. Tim Brown, Rich Gannon, they were in the zone, and the Chiefs were giving them everything they had too, but in the end, the Raiders pulled it out. Kansas City missed a field goal with 5 seconds in regulation, and with a 33-yarder, we iced it in overtime. We won the game 41-38, and with our first win at Arrowhead since 1988, Jesus. When Mike Shanahan coached the team, no less, now, the Jon Gruden era had arrived. The 2000 Oakland Raiders season was magical. It started with a tragedy as safety Eric Turner passed away due to abdominal cancer, but we started off the regular season tearing everything apart. We were 6-0, and we're back to being the silver and black everyone remembered. We drafted kicker Sebastian Janikowski in the first round because fuck it, why not? And Rich Gannon became one of the best quarterbacks in football. Finally, the Raiders had an all-pro quarterback, and their first since Ken Stabler. He was amazing. He played ruthlessly efficient football and had the volume to back it up too. Ending the regular season, dropping 52 points on our 3rd highest scoring game of our franchise to this day, as Gannon went for 230 yards, 6 incompletions, and 5 touchdowns with a 136.2 passer rating, making an all-pro team, and finishing 4th in MVP voting. This team was just really good, man. We beat the Niners off of an insane Tim Brown game winner, went 12-4, and came in the divisional round ready to headhunt. The stadium was rocking. The fans were feeding for the first Oakland Raiders playoff win since 1980, and they got it. And right away, the defense bailed them out. This was an amazing Miami defense they were going against, which caused some problems for the Raiders, but Torrey James, a defensive back in his first year with the Raiders, turned into prime Lester Hayes in this one out of nowhere, and on Miami's first possession, returned a 90-yard pick for a touchdown, and got another one later, and Jay Fiedler was in hell all day, as he had 3 picks, and the Miami offense was held to 0 points, while the Raiders won the game in a shutout, 27-0. Now, the AFC Championship was controversial, and surely this will be the most controversial moment this core is involved in, because in this game versus the Ravens, who honestly they probably weren't going to beat anyways, but it was a very possible scenario that they could have, but Tony Siragusa's fat ass landed a dirty hit on Rich Gannon early and knocked him out of the game. And without Gannon, the Raiders offense couldn't do anything. And sadly, they went home just 1 game away from a Super Bowl appearance. So yeah, I mean, I guess ring culture would say that this team was a failure in 2000, but you know, the 1970 Raiders would say otherwise, or at least that era of Raiders football where they were just constantly losing to the team that won the Super Bowl, because that's what happened this season. The Ravens had an all-time great team. Sometimes it is what it is, but in 2001, the Raiders thought they had a chance to do something special. This team was really good. They still had elite players on both sides of the ball, and they even added Jerry Rice this season, who, at the age of like 117, had a 1,000-yard season for the Raiders, but it was all because of one guy. I don't want to say it was a carry job, but damn, man. Rich Gannon's season in 2001 was special. Rich Gannon went for 27 touchdowns and only 9 picks all year, with a near 100 passer rating. So this team was great, but they were getting pretty damn old, especially on the offense. And although they were 10-3 at one point and appeared to be Super Bowl contenders, in the final 3 weeks of the season, it looked like these old geezers were running out of gas. As in the last 3 games, Rich Gannon's stats dropped off a cliff and averaged more picks than touchdowns, while former 49ers Pro Bowl running back Charlie Gardner, who is here now, was barely running for 50 a game. And although they lost to the Jets in the last game of the season, 1 week later in the wild card, things were different. And this man was the main reason for that somehow. Like, what? Gannon played really well. Gardner did as well, too. The Raiders offense could not be stopped, but Jerry Rice went for 9 catches, 183 yards, and a touchdown. The most yards all time by a player over the age of 39, about to be 40. And Jerry's got the next few records for that.
Lost the football. It's on the ground. Covered by the Raiders.
Look, can I just get this out of the way? I wasn't there to be alive for this moment, okay? But I don't know, man. Being the sperm cell I was, I'm sure I felt something while being present for this game. I mean, what do you want me to say? I don't have to talk about this game if I don't want to. It's my video, for fuck's sake. Tom said he fumbled. Charles said he fumbled. Terrible rule. Terrible enforcement of a rule. 100% should have been a fumble, but it wasn't. And Tom Brady and the Patriots won the fucking game. They won the Super Bowl. And just like the Immaculate Reception, okay, they formed a dynasty after a shit-ass rule that was called incorrectly and ruined our chance at a Super Bowl. Sorry, calm down. But unlike last time, okay, instead of having a dynasty anyways ourselves, because after the Immaculate Reception, we were still really good, we won 3 Super Bowls. No, instead, after this one moment, after the Tuck rule happened, we got 25 straight years of the equivalent of physical testicular torsion. Fuck, bro. Fuck. So then we traded Gruden. Why? Well, a lot of reasons. First of all, yes, we traded our coach, and we actually got a good package back from Tampa, so I guess we'll take 2 firsts and some cash, but we ended up blowing those picks. But on paper, it was solid value. And although Al and John seemed to be friendly on the surface, many people inside the organization said there was at least some tension. Apparently, Davis and Gruden often had heated arguments. John wasn't happy with his lack of control over the team's transactional decisions, and John Gruden tended to favor a more West Coast-oriented scheme rather than a vertical deep passing game, and Al was not super into that style of play. Whatever you choose to believe is up to you. Money was also a massive factor as his contract was expiring, but all I'm saying is I don't think Al Davis would have traded away John Madden after a few seasons for 2 first-round picks. But that's what he did with Gruden, meaning the tuck rule game was his last as the head coach of the Raiders at the time, and his legacy would be forever tied to that Brady fumble. Anyways, people weren't sure if the Raiders could repeat the 2001 success they had without John Gruden. And the Raiders only got older, too. They added Bill Romanowski, a classic Raiders type of guy who was insane and hit hard, and Rod Woodson, a Hall of Fame veteran who was also elderly, but an invaluable presence in the secondary. And luckily for the Raiders, too, this all worked out, but it was all held together by Al Davis's sheer will and the stench of piss that surrounded the players in the stadium they played in. They were good, but their new head coach, Bill Callahan, kinda didn't want to be here. He was only here because of Gruden in the first place, and it looked like he wanted out ASAP. But meanwhile, the Raiders were winning, and Rich Gannon had another insane season. He won the MVP. Just casually won the MVP at 37 years old. He led the league in like 10 categories, as he had the most completions in a season in the history of the game to that point. And the Raiders were cruising this season. And we even beat Tom Brady and the Patriots. And this one actually was ruled a fumble. Fucking crazy. But this team was actually just elite now. We had a top 10 offense, an amazing offensive line, great defense, linebacker core, everything was great. We had a center in Barrett Robbins who was mentally stable and great. And who even cares what's going on in the league? We don't need John Gruden, but I do wonder what he's up to right now. Wonder if he's coaching a good team. But the Raiders, once again in the playoffs, faced the New York Jets. And again, they bitched them in the divisional round. 30-10, and it was never even a game. And then, in the AFC Championship game versus the Titans, I know it was probably just a beautiful tailgate scenario, man. I wish I went to a playoff game in Oakland. It just didn't happen for me, though. But before the game, Metallica just performed in the parking lot, unannounced, randomly, pulling out of trucks. Raiders culture is just special stuff, man. And to make things better, we slaughtered the Titans. Just not even worth talking about. 41 points on their head, and the Raiders were going back to the Super Bowl. There was just one problem, or maybe 2, or 3, or 4. Damn it. When you're a 2000s plus Raider fan, you can't even enjoy watching your team in the bloody Super Bowl anymore. So first of all, before the game, the Raiders came up with a solid game plan. I'm sure you know the story at this point. It's pretty famous, but basically we had a run-first game plan, but just 2 days before the Super Bowl decided to pivot randomly, to just air it out, which then set off a domino effect as center Barrett Robbins was off his fucking meds, and he said he felt overwhelmed by the sudden change in the playbook and didn't feel like there was enough time to adjust. So he just, disappeared and was so fucked up by the time we found him that he couldn't even come close to playing. And then their opponent was Chucky. John Gruden and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were waiting for them. So instead of coming up with new plays, they used the same plays that they had before. The exact same plays with John Gruden. And in practice, the Buccaneers were just practicing every single play we had in the book. John Gruden was acting out Rich Gannon's cues, and come game time, John Lynch and the Bucs defense was quite literally calling out the Raiders' plays before they even happened.
Hey, Sluggo seam!
So the offense not only didn't have its Pro Bowl center, but the whole team felt like their own head coach was sabotaging them, and their opponent knew every single play. I mean, it was a fucking miracle of the Lord that this team managed to put up the 21 points they did, but they got destroyed. Just absolutely picked apart. The Oakland Raiders were blown out in the Super Bowl by John Gruden and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and after abandoning the run, they ran for 19 yards, and now, officially, 100%, the darkness shall begin. So, I'm not about to be, pissed off yet, but eventually I will be. I wasn't conscious for a lot of this, but this, from here on out, it's just gonna be pain. And boy, did the stink come. In 2003, the Raiders aged like 112 years in a few months. Every dude in the team just looked so slow, and the season also didn't start off on the best note when Bill Romanowski ripped off rookie Marcus Williams' helmet and shattered his left eye socket, leaving him unconscious. I mean, I can't think of a more lovely activity to bring a football team together than a civil lawsuit. And more injuries just kept pouring in. The football gods punished Romanowski, Gannon got hurt, Gardner went down, and this season, the Raiders won 4 games. 1 year removed from a Super Bowl. They won 4 fucking games. And after the season, everyone left. Callahan was fired. Tim Brown, the franchise all-time leader in every receiving category, left for Tampa Bay with Gruden. But at least they still had running back Charlie Gardner, and he went to Tampa as well with Gruden. But Al and the coaching staff said, fuck you, Tampa, you take all our shit while we're taking some of yours. And we signed Warren Sapp, a Hall of Fame defensive tackle, to a 7-year contract. And this was just one of the many horrible decisions the Raiders front office made. Turns out, when you bring in nothing but horrible players for like 8 years straight, you don't have a good team or a good franchise anymore, as this move back to Oakland was rapidly losing the team money, and the Raiders were now ranked as the least valuable franchise in sports. They had a horrible stadium. I mean, I loved it, but it was a shit box and a baseball field at the same time. There wasn't a big market, and the losing kept flowing in. In 2003, we did draft Nnamdi Asomugha, who was good for us, but in 2004, we took Robert Gallery, who did nothing for us as a lineman. And after 2005, the reality of what was to come was setting in for Raiders fans. This was not your average everyday darkness. This was advanced darkness. After 05, Charles Woodson broke his leg and left for Green Bay, leaving behind a disappointing legacy in Oakland of what could have been. We traded for Randy Moss, and it was actually a good trade on paper. Good value, but it didn't work out. With Rich Gannon's career basically ending due to a neck injury, the Raiders had another quarterback problem, and free agent Kerry Collins was not the guy to throw it to Randy Moss, and he led the league in picks in 2004 too. But I skipped past a lot of these post-Super Bowl seasons to discuss one team. The 2006 Oakland Raiders. The magnum opus for this entire franchise's history, and the sports history as well, in being one of the worst teams sports has ever seen. Thank fuck I wasn't alive for this team, man. Every Pain documentary I do has one of these teams, right? It's a staple of franchises like this, but the 2006 Raiders were just historically horrible on every level. After releasing Kerry Collins, who wasn't good, they turned to 2 quarterbacks, whose names Raider fans do not want to ever hear again, but here we are. Andrew Walter and Aaron Brooks. And this team fielded one of the worst offenses ever, too, because funny enough, the Raiders' defense wasn't even that bad. Tommy Kelly, Warren Sapp, Nnamdi, Michael Huff. This was a mid-defense. They weren't good, but in Week 1, the tone was set for the year when they lost 0-27 to the Chargers, and both quarterbacks rotated out and got sacked a combined 9 times. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Art Shell's back, by the way. He's the head coach again, and boy, had the game passed him by. In modern terms, dude was like Darvin Ham, but no, actually, that's kind of like the perfect comparison. He couldn't control anything. He suspended wide receiver Jerry Porter, who helped the team go 7 games without a touchdown, but not much else really happened. In terms of positives, I can't say anything, but since 2001, no team scored less points than the Raiders in a single season to this very moment in time. And besides the Rams, nobody else has even come remotely close to this level of incompetence. And I could go individually into each game if I want. Monday Night Football, putting this team on primetime, was a literal hate crime, but it happened, and they rewarded the corneas of America with a 0 bomb. And Andrew Walter got sacked another 9 times, and the only reason this team with damn near the dead last ranked offense in the millennium didn't go winless was Randy Moss carried them 1 game, and we had 2 pick-6s versus the Steelers. That's what it took to avoid 0-16. But we decided to ship off Randy Moss anyways, and sent him to the New England Patriots because he clearly was just washed and had 0 talent left in the tank, as his career just rotted away from there. He never did anything else again. Boy, I'm really excited to get to this part of the script, huh? This is just a great time. And then in 07, after we almost traded for Aaron Rodgers, giving Randy Moss to the Packers, but no, trade fell through because God forbid I'd be happy. We looked to the 2007 draft, and we're ready to select LSU quarterback prospect, say it with me, Jamarcus Russell. Did you know that Jamarcus Russell was bad at football? And did you also know that he was sent blank tapes and lied to the coaching staff and said he studied them and he drank lean? Yeah, you probably didn't know that. Surely not. And to be honest, there's not much I can really tell you about Jamarcus Russell that you don't already know. The man's story has been told hundreds and hundreds of times, and he was just straight up horrible. In 2007, he barely played, but in 2008, the Raiders were forced to give him the keys to the team, and he crashed that bitch into an alligator-infested pond. He had trouble reading defenses, he was out of shape, but also can't believe I'm saying this, but the Raiders did not even really want him there, or at least his head coach did not want him in the slightest. Before he was drafted, Lane Kiffin, the Raiders head coach at the time, reportedly begged Al Davis to take Calvin Johnson instead and pass on Jamarcus Russell, but even if that's true, I understand both sides. To be fair, Jamarcus was the consensus top pick and the Raiders needed a quarterback, so it made sense. But what didn't was the other additions Oakland made, as the Raiders signed D'Angelo Hall to a 7-year, $70 million contract, and then cut him 8 games into his first year, and also signed Javon Walker to a 6-year, $55 million contract, who caught 15 passes and sucked ass. Oh, and the clown show just still keeps going, because fucking 4 weeks into 2008, in Jamarcus's first full year as a starter, Al Davis held a press conference, and with a literal projector, showed a PowerPoint explaining why they were firing Lane Kiffin, including reading his contract out loud. Sick stuff. And if you can believe it, the 2008 Raiders were not very good either. They had Darren McFadden now, who would turn out to be an amazing player when he was healthy, which was rare. Nnamdi Asomugha was an all-pro, but this team was barren. Well, we had no talent outside of that. I mean, best case scenario, this team was 5 years away from being a solid team again, and even that was hopeful. Things just kept getting worse. 2009 started with head coach Tom Cable fracturing another coach's jaw, allegedly, and it ended in another 5-win season. We had Marcel Reese and Richard Seymour now. These guys are like good, or will be, and this is hurting my soul, man. We had like 2 hours of greatness, and this is the part of the video where I sadly gained consciousness. After 2009, my memory starts logging things, so I remember the 2010 season, and it wasn't the worst thing ever. Offensive coordinator Hugh Jackson began to revive quarterback Jason Campbell's career, and we had a respectable offense, with Pro Bowl tight end Zach Miller and the steady play of Darren McFadden, who went for 1,000 yards in the ground, while the defense had Cameron Wimbley, Tyvon Branch, Nnamdi Asomugha, and Seymour, of course. And honestly, if we didn't just whiff on every draft pick for like 4 fucking years straight, this team could have been something. But Darius Hayward-Bay and Rolando McClain, our previous first-round picks, never did anything. And we went 8-8 and missed the playoffs again, which made 2011 the biggest turning point in the franchise ever. And that was surely due to one reason. They drafted Denarius Moore. Hold on. Give me a second here. Denarius Moore. Yeah. You know Denarius Moore, right? 0-time Pro Bowl wide receiver. Denarius Moore. He was my favorite, okay? That's all that matters. So Al Davis, in his twilight years, did not make great football decisions all the time. What he built was special, but there's no denying this team simply did not have talent anymore. We played our asses off, but we just missed on too many coaches, free agents, and draft picks to be somewhat competitive. But what Al Davis gave to the game of football cannot be understated, and I don't need to say anything more. You've been watching this video for hours. You know what Al Davis has meant to the Raiders and to all of us as just football enjoyers who get to watch this league field teams that slam into each other every Sunday. The NFL would not be here today in the state that it is without Al Davis. And so, when Al Davis passed away on October 8th, 2011, the world mourned his loss. The very next day after his passing was a Sunday. A Sunday where the Oakland Raiders would face off against the Houston Texans with the word Al on their helmets now. Football was completely secondary, but at this point the Raiders were 2-2, and a win could be huge for momentum reasons. And the Raiders fought hard, but Houston was knocking on the door, 2nd and goal from the 5 with 7 seconds remaining. And the Raiders, they got the stop with 10 men on the field, no less, while the 11th was above as they got an interception by Michael Huff, and everyone just started crying. Everyone. Mark Davis, Al's son, who was now the new owner, the coaches, the players, the fans. Hell, I mean, I even cried a bit doing the research for this, and I'll be honest, and shit, maybe you feel something now that we've been on this journey together for 3 hours almost at this point, but it was really a beautiful moment to watch this happen. That one man who held the position that in most sports franchises, being an owner, are just seen as the cold guy above who's completely out of touch and just throws money at things. But for the Raiders, Al Davis was different, and everyone mourned his loss. And in Hugh Jackson's speech after the game, too, you could feel exactly how he felt.
Losing that man hurt me more than you know. But you know what? Just like I told you, I know he loves you guys. Just like he loves his coaching staff and his organization. But you know what you men did? You kept fighting because you know what? That's what that man will want you to do. That's what Raiders do. That's what Raiders do. It ain't gonna always be pretty. I never told you it wouldn't be hard, and I never told you it'd be pretty. But you know what? There's nothing like winning.
So that was Al Davis's legacy. But sadly, football was played this season, and in the final moves of Al Davis's life, the Raiders made Hugh Jackson the head coach. Stop laughing, okay? He wasn't that bad at one point, but they also brought in quarterback Carson Palmer, who had a confusing dispute with the Bengals, and the team moved out of the Jamarcus era real quick. But 2011 was just a year. I can't even say weird anymore, because for our standards, going 6-0 in division, but still having an 8-8 record, having multiple shootings in a preseason game versus the Niners, and having the most penalties in any season in the history of football in the modern era to this point is pretty routine stuff. But 2012 is where Mark Davis really fucked up. After going 8-8, we scrubbed house. Once again, I know Hugh Jackson's reputation today, but the guys loved him in the locker room. I mean, you can tell how much he loved being a Raider too, but we moved on after just 1 year of him as the head coach. He had 1 season and had to deal with a ridiculous amount of emotional baggage, so the Raiders better at least bring in a guy who knows what the fuck he's doing. And if they bring in a dumbass who can't coach for shit and never could and never will be able to coach for shit, surely they'll only fire him after 1 season, right? Surely. Hi, Dennis Allen. Glad that you could make it. Glad that you could be in this video. And you all know what I'm about to say, right? It's the 2010s era. This is my peak Raiders fandom. But I'm also a bit conflicted with where I am at in this video right now because I've made 3 videos, at least, I think, on this era of the Raiders. I did the McDaniels video, I did the Derek Carr era video, I did a John Gruden video, and then I also did the 2016 video, so I've covered this era in extensive detail. I've made like 3 hours of content in this era alone, so I guess in the interest of neither of us going insane, I'm gonna be a little bit more lenient with this portion of the video, but I'm still gonna hit the emotional notes. Don't worry, I'm gonna be screaming. That'll come, but just want to make that very clear. The 2012 Oakland Raiders fucking sucked. I'm getting tired of saying this, man. You know what's funny though? From making this video and spending literal days reading about old players and games, it's kind of fascinating that, like, this franchise was the gold standard of sports for 40 years, and then I'm born, and all of a sudden we're worse than the fucking Browns. I think this one's on me, guys. But anyways, 2012 was a crime against happiness. Terrell Pryor, a gadget player who would become a wide receiver, got some run, and eventually he wouldn't pan out as the Raiders' starting quarterback, and Carson Palmer threw the ball near 600 times, but that didn't amount to much, as outside of future Hall of Famer Denarius Moore, the Raiders couldn't move the ball forward, and the best player in the fucking team was Sebastian Janikowski. But that's the one thing we get right, damn it, okay? We always have goated special teams. In 2013, we brought in Marquette King, and no one player represents 2010's Raiders football like Marquette King to me, okay? My nostalgia boner is peaking. Dude was legitimately a top 5 punter at his peak, and his antics will never be forgotten. I'm 100% serious though. Him punting was pretty much always more fun than watching the offense take the field. And especially in 2013 too. Another year, another 4-win season, and fuck bro. I mean, in 2013, the Raiders had gone 5 straight draft classes without adding a single impact player in the first 2 rounds. The last good player we drafted in the top 2 rounds was Darren McFadden in 2008. We legitimately could not draft. General manager Reggie McKenzie was on the hot seat. It should have been just incinerating under him, and somehow Dennis Allen was not. It was announced that we'd bring him back for 2014. Awesome! Just in time for him to fuck over another one of our quarterbacks. I don't know what else to say other than things were so bad, I would have took a linchpin to my nuts if it meant having Hugh Jackson back. But at this point, the football gods had enough. They said, fine, we've had our fun, but we'll throw you a bone this one time. And the 2014 Raiders draft class was generational. Absolutely generational. We took good players, believe it or not. Khalil Mack, Derek Carr, and Gabe Jackson were our first 3 picks, and we got Jelly Ellis too, who was a funny fat guy, and TJ Carey. I hope you know this took me a lot of holding back to not write a paragraph on TJ Carey and the war crimes that he committed, but the Raiders in 2014 had direction. We had Derek Carr. We had Mac. We had Dennis Allen still. Thank fuck. Okay, 4 games in, we fired him. And Greg Olsen, the offensive coordinator, was now mainly tasked with molding Derek Carr, and he did a great job. In 2014, we had some good moments. We randomly had one of the highest pass percentages in NFL history because we were getting blown out a ton at 0.65, and we had a game versus the 49ers that I was not allowed to physically go to because of the violence. And there was only 49 incidents where police had to be involved, and 25 fans were put in jail. So not terrible for an Oakland home game, honestly. But 2015 was more progress, with real wideouts in Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, and other weapons on the offense. Now Derek Carr showed plenty of potential and made a Pro Bowl with 32 touchdowns to just 13 picks in his second season. It was beautiful. And also, Charles Woodson has been here for 3 years now, and he retired after this year too. But I don't know, man. I get it. He is a Raiders legend. I feel like that's kind of fair to say, but he plays prime of his career with the Packers, and he left the team on a not great note the first time, so I don't even think it's a question to put guys like Howie Long and Gene Upshaw above him on an all-time Raiders list. But still, I appreciate everything he did for us, and it was fun to be able to hear the speech that he gave. Which leads us to 2016. Why do I get paid to do this, man? Once again, for my own fucking mental health, I'm not going into deep detail again, okay? I've simply talked about the 2016 Raiders too many fucking times, but this team wasn't perfect, okay? But damn it, they were in my eyes. Every week something crazy happened. The Saints game, the Bucks game, the Panthers game, the Falcons, Ravens, Chargers, and the Indianapolis Colts game. I don't like Trent Cole. I think he's a poopy head. And on December 24th, Christmas, Merry fucking Eve, my soul sunk into my sock and was punctured by a heroin needle. Derek Carr was having an MVP season. He already was dealing with a finger injury. He already had the game won. We were winning by damn near fucking 30 points, and instead we watched as Derek Carr ended his potential superstar career and was never the same player again after he broke his leg. We then went on to win the Super Bowl with Connor Cook, and I won't accept any other answers. But I don't know, man. It's just, it felt so unfair in the moment, and it still does to this day, that this is like the one moment we've had in the last, or the one moment I've had in my entire lifetime of happiness watching this team, and it was like 13 weeks of good stuff. So yes, this team probably wasn't going to win the Super Bowl. I don't think that we were going to be able to go into Foxborough and have a defense with just Khalil Mack and Bruce Irvin sometimes and beat Tom Brady, but who knows? And this team still to this day goes down as one of the biggest what-ifs in sports. So the question for 2017 and the future was, could Derek Carr return to form? And yes, he could. Oh, fuck yeah, we're so back. Week 2, we blew out our first team since like 2002. The vibes were so high. Marshawn was dancing on the sideline, who's here, by the way, and this was when, I'm serious when I say this, okay? I'm 100% serious. Week 2 of 2017 was the last time I had any hope in this team doing anything, until literally present day. In week 3, it was all crushed. First it was my nuts, and then it was my spirit. As on national television, we got fisted by Kirk Cousins. Derek Carr got hurt again, and this season was somewhat a wash. We had a fun game versus the Chiefs, and I want to be very clear that I always love these super fun games, even with no stakes. I mean, I have to, or else I wouldn't be a fan, but still. Although we had our moments deep down, we knew we weren't making any real noise. But we had one chance left, Sunday Night Football, versus the Dallas Cowboys. And we had them right where we wanted them. 4th down on their own side of the field. It's over. We stopped them. Wait, what is he doing? What is he doing? Is that an index card? Wait, you can't do that. Oh, wait, what the fuck? Okay, then, nice. Just another day in the office for us. And Derek Carr totally didn't fumble out of the end zone, by the way. But shockingly, the Raiders pretty much fired everyone and brought back, but while that was happening, it looked like the Raiders were gonna move again. The mayor of Oakland said that she was not committed to keeping the Raiders in Oakland, and unless there was private funding, the city would lose the team. And eventually, as we'll get to, they did move again, but once again, mainly because of money and politics. But we had John Gruden now, for a cheap price of $100 million, Jesus Christ. Okay, bro. If it works, I guess. He had passion still, but Gruden immediately traded Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper and pressed the reset button, and we just tanked in 2018, simply. He wasted another year of Derek Carr's prime, which I'm not even saying was wrong. I think we should have tanked this year, but it's just unfortunate. And at least this season was better than watching Andrew Walter, but not even by much. We won 4 games, and even that felt like a miracle, as ignoring the second to last Denver game, we won 3 of our last 4 games by a combined 8 points. But that Steelers win was fucking great. I'm not even gonna lie, that was one of my favorite wins ever. But some poor fans tricked themselves into believing that we had something in 2019. But we didn't. And with Mike Mayock as the GM now and 3 first-round picks to work with, we took 3 players who are not on the fucking team right now. Clelin Ferrell is a name that I never want to hear again, and I almost threw something at my TV last year seeing him on special teams for the Commanders. Thankfully, though, he's not on the team anymore, and if we didn't draft a certain player by the name of Max Crosby later on, who is 24% of what's keeping me alive to this day, the dude is literally like Lyle Alzado combined with Howie Long. He's perfect, okay? Nobody hurt him. I'm really not having a fun time right now. I'm upset, and you know, surely we could use a Hall of Fame receiver who's just the missing piece to this final puzzle that we're putting together in Oakland, and surely we're going to be an amazing team if we bring in Antonio Brown. I've never heard of Antonio Brown in my life. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but yeah, whatever. We collapsed versus the Jets this season, and even worse, and the most upset I've ever been at any sporting event, we choked a lead to the Jaguars, got fucked by the refs, and in the last game in Oakland, we lost to Gardner Minshew. And this was it. This was the end of the Oakland era. This was how it ended. And we were now the Las Vegas Raiders. Hold on, give me a second. I've shown it multiple times before, but I'm showing it again. This piece of rotting plywood, man. This is the seat. This is the seat from the Raiders-Jaguars game where we collapsed, and I took it out. I ripped it out of the seat, and I brought it home in a completely legal manner, and I hate this.
Why did it have to happen like that?
We drafted Henry Ruggs. Can I get a fucking break? Holy sh! We drafted Damon Arnett, who has an affinity for firearms. Hey, that's pretty cool. Nice. All right, well, the 2020 season was here, and after telling Tom Brady we don't need him and Gronk. Anyways, just take your pick, okay? What week do you think the collapse happened in 2020, huh? Which one? Maybe week 6, week 9, if you're ambitious? No, it was actually week 12. Good job, guys. We got gutted by the Falcons, and then let this happen at the hands of Ryan Fitzpatrick. And somehow, all of this was nothing compared to what the 2021 season gave us, because this year, pound for pound, was the most chaotic in the history of sports, and I think I can say that confidently. Derek Carr was still good, but then John Gruden's racist emails leaked twice, which led to John Gruden resigning and was kicked out of the NFL, and this was just step 1. And under interim head coach Rich Bisaccia, we fought hard, but we just kept taking body blows. Henry Ruggs tragically took a life. Damon Arnett did things on IG Live, and on top of all of that, John Madden passed away. So it was just a lot to take in a few months. But for me at this point in my fandom, I wasn't even fazed. I mean, this all seemed pretty par for the course, but what wasn't normal was we still had a shot to make the playoffs. And in the final week of the season, on Sunday Night Football, I saw the best Raiders game I ever saw in my life. And after 74 fourth down conversions, we overcame everything, and we beat the Chargers, and we made it to the play. What do you mean the play counts? You just blew the fucking whistle. You can't. Sorry, we lost the game to the Bengals. They got us. They were better, and it was back to the drawing board, and we made the choice to let go of Rich Bisaccia, and No, I'm not doing this. This is my video, okay? I've had enough. I'm not talking about Josh McDaniels anymore. I've actually brought in an extremely intelligent source here. Here comes ESPN senior analyst Dan Margulis, okay? He's gonna talk about Josh McDaniels, because I'm not.
I am Dan Margulis, NFL ESPN insider, and I will be providing some insight on the Josh McDaniels era. So from my perspective, I think that drafting Tyree Wilson over Jalen Carter was a big mistake in the eyes of Dan Margulis, the NFL senior insider.
Because the 2024 season in the post-Adolf era was disappointing. But even that was a nice break from what we've had to deal with, honestly. Just plain and simple disappointment was peaceful. It was boring as fuck, don't get me wrong. I've never been less interested in this team as we won 4 games, but Brock Bowers is really, really good at football, and so is Max Crosby, so that's nice. But now we enter 2025, where our new head coach is Pete Carroll. Our offensive coordinator is Chip Kelly, and for the first time since Derek Carr was here, we have a competent team, potentially. No, we probably don't. The defense is still Max Crosby and others, but with first-round pick Ashton Jeanty and others, alongside Geno Smith and Brock Bowers, we're going to run the hell out of the football and play hard as usual. Are we going to be last in the division? Probably, but hey, all I'm saying is Bowers and Jeanty will be tough to guard for at least the next half a decade. Okay, I think that's going to be it. I feel like bad ending the video at this point. I mean, we spent like 3 hours together. I'm going to miss you. It was a good time together. I really hope you enjoyed this video, though. It was a lot of research, the most effort I've put into any video, and I really hope it came out well. I mean, from everything. We started in 1960 with the before Al Davis Raiders. We did the 70s era, the dynasty with Ken Stabler. We did the 80s with Plunkett, the 2 unlikely Super Bowls. The 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. It was a roller coaster, so I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, there's a reason why I love the Raiders, and maybe you understand now, at least just a little bit better. But anyways, if you like this video, then subscribe, because I guess I don't have a video as long as this one on the channel, but I got a lot of other documentaries which are super fun to watch, so feel free to check those out. I did one on the Baltimore Ravens a few weeks ago. It's pretty good, trust me, and thanks to all my Patreons for pledging tiers. It truly does mean a lot for the support. But anyways, until next time.